get beat down, chump. Oh, good looking, homie. What up, homie? In the pen, we play strip football.
Can't decide. Yeah, I kind of like the squattier look, I think.
Not enough horny men around this part of town.
Hey, where you get
We
your
gonna roll,
haircut at?
homie, or what?
Well, let's make it happen then.
Get your fat ass up, stay close.
Yo, I'm thugging. Move, bitch.
The whip, give it here. Right, what up, dog?
Hey,
Gotta get
more
more.
so we can roll.
Are you mentally fit to drive? A nigga DOC, no motherfucker.
It's believed he was close to uncovering a huge corruption ring within the LSPD. A police spokesman denied the story. A San Fierro man is suing the Renaissance.
You want air? That's going in my retirement fund. Hey, you need a whole quick pump. Give me that money.
Oh, I'm getting rocked over here. Whoa!
You want some lead in you, huh? Ah!
Move forward, brothers. Move forward.
Oh!
And the vest disappeared. Phew.
You got
Yeah, this is bitch, huh? What you say? Give me them chips. Fool. What you think now, fool? Give me that grip. Ah!
Oh my gosh, I should have. It's always I should have. It's always I should have. That's the excuse to use to kill you. You should have kept running for the body armor. That was the excuse. Ouch. That was the excuse, bro. Ouch, 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 ouch.
Smile now, cry later, Holmes.
Hey, baby.
Homie.
You are fresh and dressed, man.
Visiting ammunition. At ammunition, we don't need a background.
It's all
check.
fresh out of the
One
crate.
American currency, conflict diamonds, or your daughter is enough. Coming soon, armor-piercing bullets. Ask our salesman about every sportsman's
Perfect for killing,
favorite,
pure
the
and simple.
anti-tank missile. You don't need to clean the deer when he's already been minced. The store leading the fight against communism is having a blowout sale. Ammunition has a wide array of peacemakers.
Have fun.
Buy ammunition on Militia Mondays. Exercise your Second Amendment rights and get 10% off all armor-piercing bullets. We're the only gun store that lets you try it before you buy it.
There are cultists everywhere, friend.
We've got them. Flamethrowers? Oh, yeah. No credit? No.
Oh, this that bomb.
Bitch can ride them thighs all day.
Stolen team's in first place.
Look, signs look more normal.
Cool.
A bitch ain't got no time for this shit.
Hey, my kicks.
Get a move along. I enjoy it.
Move, chump, before I get upset. Look out, idiot, move!
I can't decide, dude.
Ah, thanks. I really needed you to drive into me.
Get your stupid ass moving. Oh, the players know me.
Come on, dude, move!
Someone I ripped his arm off. Hey, you want this to get uglier?
Move in, I got y'all back. Get back here, you son of a bitch.
Ow!
Ah,
Scrap, motherfucker.
Told you, bros. Busted.
I'm going after this piece of puke.
This all you giving me?
I could use some backup.
Out of this shit.
What you say to me?
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, you can see that bitch, huh? That's going in my retirement. Hey, you need a whole plate. This it? I'm back in here, fool. Oh, look, a gat. What you think now, fool?
Rush this buster. Hey, man, you can't be doing that to me, man.
You want to get fucked up, huh? You want to get smoked, baby? Oh! Give me that money.
I got your back. I'm jumping on this fool.
You in it for life, huh? Give me that grip.
You don't want to make me mad, bro.
I'm a striving professional, lady. I value making something of myself.
Yeah, and it's all good.
Have you started on a great career like me?
Sure, but
See you later.
G's up, fool. Give me them chips.
Mom's gonna try to mom.
Man, buzz back so I can make a move.
I'm strapped, motherfucker.
I'm about to lock up on this fool.
Get out of here.
Yesterday, that puts him on the other side of a line.
We ain't flooded, same difference.
If Leo arrests me one more time, damn boy, you're looking good.
Straight.
I was sheriff of this county when I was 25 years old. Hard to believe.
I've been thinking a lot about the opening monologue to No Country for Old Men. Through his solemn narration, Sheriff Bell reflects on the men that came before him, sensing a great gap between the world as it was back in their time and the world as it seems to have become in his.
You can't help but compare yourself against the old-timers. Can't help but wonder how they'd operated these times.
The crime you see now, it's hard to even take its measure, he says after recounting a particularly unsettling interaction with a criminal. And mind you, that's before the movie has even properly begun, before Bell has even encountered the case and the man that will truly rattle his cage. It's not that he's afraid of it, he assures us, but rather that he doesn't want to push his chips forward and go out and meet something he doesn't understand, doesn't want to engage with a world that seems increasingly alien and cruel and complex, that feels like it's coming apart at the seams.
Man would have to put his soul
I'll be
at
back with
hazard.
friends.
You have to say, okay, I'll be part of this world.
I've been thinking a lot about this monologue, much more so now than I did when the movie first released, because in some way I feel like I've grown into Sheriff Bell myself, feel somewhat discouraged by the time that I live in. I'm sure many can relate to this, especially nowadays. It's not just the sense that things are bad and getting worse, but also that deeper feeling of having lost some understanding and some faith in the world around you.
It's the times. These are frightening times.
Darker time is coming. The world's gone to the dogs.
It's a world without hope.
Keep getting worse.
And the hardest part about that is that it puts into question your own presence in this world. It gets you to doubt your own philosophy, your own beliefs about the way things are and about how they should be. Because if you're no longer sure which way is right, where do you go? Who do you become?
Life, homie, you down? So what's been going
Men
down?
are
What's up?
haunted by the vastness of eternity.
Come on, dude.
And
Roll with
so we
it.
ask ourselves,
Well, let's do
will
it,
our
motherfucker.
actions echo across the centuries?
Roll, dude. We gotta put work in.
Movies had always been greatly informative to my personal philosophy, had always shaped my notions of the good and the honorable, probably since long before I was consciously aware of it.
Okay, Playboy,
Watch that.
What man is a man who does not make the world better?
In fact, I don't think it was until I went to college that I first took a more conscious interest in the subject, and that I first started to gain a better understanding of the actual philosophies that were driving the movies that I was so inspired by. It was the beginning of a more active pursuit of what it means to be a good person, and of what it means to live a meaningful life. And like every other novice philosopher, I started at the beginning, the very beginning.
A king isn't born, Alexander. He's made by steel and by suffering.
The virtue ethics of Aristotle is a moral philosophy that is focused on character. It proposes that there are virtuous traits like courage, wisdom, honesty, and generosity, and that we can cultivate these through practice and repetition.
Wax on, wax off.
We are what we repeatedly do, Aristotle famously said. And so excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. It's the foundational philosophy of most classically heroic stories that I grew up with. Stories that emphasize character development, that show us how we can become good by practicing goodness, by being curious, passionate, and determined.
You are not what you were born, but what you have it in yourself to be.
It ain't about how hard you hit.
Why do we fall?
It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
Heroic stories like these also give us role models to live up to. They give us good characters who demonstrate how to separate virtues from vices, how to choose moderation over excess, and community over solitude.
Now come the days of the king.
They are the teleological image at the end of the journey, the aspirational vision of the kind of person we want to become.
You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. Whole life have a balance. Embodied within that hope is the fundamental belief in the potential of every person to be a force for good.
For Frodo. Your compassion is a weakness your enemies will not share.
That's why it's so important. It separates us from them.
I don't remember exactly when or how it happened, but at some point my interest turned towards deontological or rule-based ethics. These are the moral philosophies that we find in movies such as The Dark Knight, Kingdom of Heaven, A Hidden Life, Hacksaw Ridge, and A Most Violent Year. Movies that feature heroic characters who adhere uncompromisingly to a set of moral principles, and for whom the means are always more important than the end.
You should know that I have always taken the path that is most right.
And I can't do
The result
What I believe is wrong.
is never in question for me.
It is a kingdom of conscience.
Just what path do you take to get there?
Or nothing.
I don't know how I'm going to live with myself if I don't stay true to what I believe.
Despite deontological ethics being categorically different from virtue ethics, for me, on that more personal level, it always felt like they flowed pretty naturally into each other. It felt like I had gained an understanding of the virtues that I wanted to live by, and deontological ethics were just a way to codify those virtues into something more concrete.
Speak the truth, always, even if it leads to your death.
Because the thing about virtue ethics is that it can be a bit nebulous. It doesn't necessarily force you into action. It doesn't necessarily force you into making decisive and consequential choices in the way that a rule-based philosophy does do. For if you adhere to concrete universal rules rather than general virtuous traits, your interaction with the world will inevitably become more specific, more contentious, and therefore also more difficult.
When you stand before God, you cannot say, "But I was told by others to do thus," or that virtue was not convenient at the time. This will not suffice.
And this is not only because you might be demanded to make serious sacrifices, to pay a real price for your conscientiousness, but also because this direct confrontation with real-world situations and dilemmas is bound to challenge the very essence of the philosophy you've committed yourself to, is bound to lay bare all its internal contradictions and impracticalities.
What good do you think your defiance is doing anyone?
What do you do when everything you value in this world is under attack?
No one will be changed. The world will go on as before.
Jerusalem has no need of a perfect knight.
Your actions may even have the opposite effect of what you intend. Someone else will take your place.
Let me ask you something. If the rule you followed brought you to this, of what use was the rule?
In this sense, rule-based ethics only highlight the fact that a moral philosophy isn't a resolution, it is a problem definition. The path forward may seem obvious with certain major conflicts where it is relatively easy to say, do not do this or do not do that. But how about the countless little ones we encounter every day? Now more than ever, we can see just how overwhelmingly interconnected we really are. How even the most insignificant of decisions have far-reaching moral consequences. And how absolutely paralyzing it would be to consider all of them, let alone act decisively towards them without committing some form of hypocrisy or compromise. Or better yet, without erasing ourselves as moral agents altogether. Because by this logic, if we were to maintain a truly clean conscience in our modern society, wouldn't we just end up severing ties until we're no longer connected to anything at all? Wouldn't that whole effort just be a misguided fantasy?
It won't be hard, it'll be impossible. You know, whatever beliefs you have in your crazy head now, they won't ever play out. It don't work that way.
Of course, there is a logic to the idea that even if we only do a little good, that's still better than nothing.
If it lives only for a while, Tiberius, it still has lived.
But still, it makes you wonder to what extent your moral ambitions are actually serving a greater good, or if they are just feeding your own vanity. It does feel like there is a fine line between taking a decisive moral stance on a matter and just drawing a small protective circle, like a narrow zone of interest that allows you to cling to a simple and often convenient notion of goodness, which can then be used to ignore the actually demanding aspects of life's difficulties, or perhaps even to look away from your culpability in other greater evils.
You know he's never once said that he regrets Hiroshima?
Are you better than the rest? Are you alone wise?
When you really think about it, there is something kind of self-centered about putting your own conscience, your own moral purity, before anything else. It encourages a certain reactionary passiveness, a certain reflexive retreat into the self, especially in those complicated situations that may have benefited from more active engagement, where more good could have been achieved if only we had been less rigid about how to go about it.
There'll be a day when you will wish you had done a little evil to do a greater good.
Perhaps diametrically opposed to deontological ethics, we find consequentialism, the philosophies that judge moral value based on the consequences of an action, more so than its intention, and that generally focus on maximizing the best possible outcomes.
Logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Consequentialist characters tend to be more goal-oriented and tend to more actively assert themselves and their ideas of what is right and just into the world, even if those ideas are achieved through more questionable means.
You violated the only absolutely inviolate rule of international relationships.
Violence can be used for good. I thought that one less bomb maker in the world would be a good thing.
What are you talking about?
Justice.
The time for half measures and talk is over.
What do we do, Russ? Fuck him. Did you see he committed something?
The most immediately appealing quality about consequentialist ethics is that it feels like it offers a palpable reward. It is, after all, specifically focused on achieving concrete results, and such results tend to be more...
Got him. So they actually did end up catching the shooter, which appeared to be Tyler Robinson. Now, what was really interesting about this during this time was that there was a lot of speculation as to who this person was. Obviously, he wasn't caught immediately. The individual that was caught was apparently this older gentleman. That individual was a man known as George Zinn. And, of course, this guy wasn't the actual shooter, but, of course, in a rapid turn of events into what is one of the wildest stories of 2025, this guy has been charged with apparently possessing child insane shit to witness, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, goddamn. You know, if there was a bingo game we were playing, you would never be able to guess what's happening. Now, in the shooting, it actually occurred, multiple angles had come out, and one of the angles apparently showcased what appeared to be a actual shooter running across the rooftops. Now, it's kind of hard to tell. I guess that would be it, though it feels more like I'm looking at a spec than the actual shooting. Now, of course, as this had happened, more and more information had come out, and of course, the news agencies alongside showcased the actual shooter running on this rooftop. So you could see him right over here, running, and then, of course, he's going to eventually have to jump down, possibly, hopefully break a leg during this. So, of course, he's, just hanging off, gets down a little bit, jumps, kind of survives that, limps a little bit, and then runs away. So obviously this triggered about a 24 to 48 hour manhunt where the FBI, Salt Lake City in this case, was involved trying to get everybody to pass information on this shooting. And now at this moment in time, the FBI director, Kash Patel, was now, there's a lot of words that are used when discussing people that are incompetent leaders or people in power. And one of those words that I've seen floated around is DEI hires. When they often use, when the allegation is diversity, equity, and inclusion is picked before meritocracy when picking somebody. I think without a doubt, this fucking guy might be the biggest example of a DEI hire. Because nowhere did the FBI actually really do their job. At the end of the day, what eventually led to this kid being caught was eventually, when an image was released, the kid's father ended up actually, identifying him, and basically he convinced his child to turn themselves in to the FBI, to the actual law enforcement agencies. So if it wasn't for the family, this kid might have actually gotten away with it, because for a while, there really wasn't much activity going on with the Premier League of law enforcement agencies. So just before 10 p.m. that night, Robinson, his dad, and a close friend who previously worked in law enforcement drove together from Washington, Utah to Washington County Sheriff's Office in Hurricane. Sergeant Lance Alfred, a spokesperson to the Sheriff's Office, told ABC News. So yeah, if it wasn't for the family friend, this guy might have actually gotten away with it. So again, because of this entire thing, one of the reasons why I didn't really talk about this is because A, it's not in my wheelhouse. I don't really jump into it. The only reason I'm talking about it now at all is because I feel like this whole assassination is being used as a way for the government to start shifting its focus to a lot of areas where I think they can start policing our speech. I think they're really jumping into a lot of social media networks where, for the last few months, we've talked about things like chat control. We've talked about the government hating things like encryption. We've talked about the government's surveillance apparatus becoming ever and ever larger. And, with third-party organizations like Palantir, which these, federal agencies love to tap into, love to partner with, I really don't see any of these collaborations working at all in comparison to, again, the shooter's family friend and dad turning them in. Really effective use of our tax dollars and really good showcase as to why we should let the government fucking govern us harder, daddy, if it doesn't actually amount to much happening. So what's really kind of insane about this, too, is everyone, I felt like, as this was occurring, was trying to identify, what the political leanings of the shooter was, whether this person was a left-leaning, terrorist or a right-leaning terrorist, because ultimately, violence to effect political gains, that's the definition of terrorism. It felt like people were more interested in picking any side. I feel like everyone, aside from, Charlie's wife, and of course, obviously, Candace Owens, many people were looking at this guy's death as a way to push a narrative or push some level of control. Again, I will say, Charlie Kirk is not a man that I personally agreed with on a lot of things, and I'm sure vice versa that would have been met. But I always prefer debating somebody as opposed to, enjoying and reveling in the death of people. That is just disgusting. And if you find that wrong, then you should just leave. Simple as that. I like to be a reasonable, moderate individual, not a fucking nut job on the internet, okay? That's simple as that. But speaking of nut jobs, we like to use the term radicalization. So in a court document that was released, there was a few messages that came between Robinson and their girlfriend, who appeared to be this transgender individual. Now, these chat logs are kind of cringe to listen to, but these were things that came out, and these were chat logs allegedly performed on Discord. So to give you an idea, there was a lot of shit that came out. When investigating this individual, there was a rifle that was found with etched bullets that apparently had words like nice bulge, notices bulge, ooh, what's this? The second cartridge had hey fascist, catch, and then of course arrow symbols. Third cartridge was oh bella chow, bella chow, bella chow, chow chow. Fourth cartridge, if you read this, you are gay, Lamau. So yeah, I'm telling you, when they were reading this on the news, I'm sure there was a lot of people who were called by families asking, them what the fuck ooh meant, and what was notice bulge. That must have been an awkward conversation. But to give you an idea, between Robinson and their roommate, who apparently they were allegedly romantically involved with, the chat log went like this. I'm still okay, my love, but I'm stuck in Orem for a little while longer yet. Shouldn't be long until I can come home. But I gotta grab my rifle still. To be honest, I had hoped to keep this secret till I died of old age. I'm sorry to involve you. And the roommate was, you weren't the one who did it, right? I am. I'm sorry. I thought they caught the person. No, they grabbed some crazy old dude, then interrogated someone in similar clothing. I had planned to grab my rifle from my drop point shortly
How did you
after,
know that? Yeah.
but most of the side of town got locked down. It's quiet, almost enough to get out, but there's one vehicle lingering.
Dude, he talks
Why did I do it? Yeah, I've had enough of this hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out. If I'm able to grab my rifle unseen, I will have left no evidence. Going to attempt to retrieve it again, hopefully they've moved on. I haven't seen anything about them finding it. How long have you been planning it? A bit over a week, I believe. I can get close to it, but there's a squad car parked right by it. I think they've already swept that spot, but I don't want to chance it. Robinson goes, I'm wishing I had circled back and grabbed it as soon as I got to my vehicle. I'm worried what my old man would do if I didn't bring back Grandpa's rifle. I don't know if it had a serial number, but it wouldn't trace to me. I wouldn't worry about prints. I had to leave it in a bush where I changed outfits. Didn't have the ability or time to bring it with. I might have to abandon it and hope they don't find prints. How the fuck will I explain losing it to my old man? So, yeah, these were a set of Discord messages that were shared, and people were obviously kind of criticizing whether this was real or not. And look, I don't know if the government would fake Discord messages as they release them to the public in court documentation, but again, anything is possible in today's fucking upside-down, topsy-turvy world that we goddamn live in. So, of course, look, if it's one thing I know about Charlie Kirk is that he valued debate and he valued freedom of speech, and if it's one thing he didn't agree with was the moniker of hate speech. Well, it seems as if his side of the aisle is now branding hate speech as a real definition, even though the side that claimed that hate speech really isn't a real thing. And the thing about hate speech, when you look at it from the free speech angle, is hate speech could really be anything. Who defines what it actually is? Is it an arbitrary limitation to free speech? Let's listen to some of the free speech party members talk about hate speech.
Charlie said, that there was no such thing as hate speech. He obviously, no one anticipated what happened to Charlie, but you have always been...
So the Pam Bondi, who famously cannot even handle this Epstein investigation, goes, hate speech that crosses the line into threats of violence is not protected by the First Amendment. It's a crime. For far too long, we've watched the radical left normalize threats, call for assassinations, and cheer on political violence. Now, thank God for things like community notes, because they say even the Constitution protects most violent speech. The Supreme Court rules it's legal to justify or celebrate violence or advocate or teach the duty necessary and proprietary of it, but not incitement to or imminent violence, such as telling a mob with weapons to kill someone. Like recently, Jimmy Kimmel was completely taken down, and apparently even Donald Trump here, the president, was talking about taking away licenses for TV networks who are apparently negative towards it. Now, when you got the government coming in and basically taking away a license through the FCC based on, again, how they talk about the administration, that I think is a bit of an assault on free speech, simply because the government is getting involved and they're not, this should not be happening, okay? When you have a network and you have evening shows and all they do is hit Trump, that's all they do. If you go back, I guess they haven't had a conservative one in years or something. When you go back and take a look, all they do is hit Trump. They're licensed. They're not allowed to do that. And look, ultimately, you know, I think a lot of these platforms have the choice of saying whatever it is that they want. If the administration doesn't like it, I don't think they should really be considering taking away licenses for it. It almost seems like we're headed towards state-sponsored propaganda. But again, I think when it comes to a guy like Charlie Kirk, I'm sure even he would agree that platforms have all the right to say what they need to, as long as, again, you know, it's their free speech to exercise. So yeah, free speech is just one of those things that it feels like now people want to decide what is what. And look, I think free speech, when it comes to the government talking about it, all speech is okay. As much speech as you can logically allow. I've always said, and I think this is probably the one thing me and Charlie can agree on, is that there really isn't anything like, look, free speech is one of those things where you either have to really set that hard-line stance, okay? If you want free speech, you have to be willing to live with speech that you personally don't agree with, right? It's because if you can talk, if you can deal with speech that you don't agree with, it protects you down the road when you say something that, you know, everyone else doesn't agree with. Free speech and the laws that surround it are meant to protect people that often have the most uninviting opinions, often have the opinions that are usually meant to be shunned. You don't want to live in a society that's just one giant hug box or hive mind. You want to have and foster a diversity of opinions. And that can only happen when you actually protect free speech for what it fucking is. Now, to go back to the Discord messages that had happened with Tyler Robinson, this sparked a new wave of discussion by the government. The government's gotten this hard on for going after, again, what they consider to be radicalization. I'm not going to deny that radicalization isn't a thing. It absolutely has become a thing. And it's such a thing where in the Oversight Committee, the chairman now invites the CEOs of Discord, Steam, Twitch, and Reddit to testify on the radicalization of online forum users. So inside here, the chairman writes, the politically motivated assassination of Charlie Kirk claimed the life of a husband, father, and American patriot. In the wake of this tragedy, and amid other acts of politically motivated violence, Congress has a duty to oversee the online platforms that radicals have used to advance political violence. To prevent future radicalization and violence, the CEOs must appear before the Oversight Committee and explain what actions they've taken to ensure that the platforms are not exploited for nefarious purposes. Now look, we've talked a lot about radicalization, and there's been studies that have showed that when it comes to a lot of online platforms, there can be a situation where platforms and their algorithms push people to more extremist content. For instance, at the UC Davis, their researchers tested YouTube's recommendations engine over time. So for instance, YouTube tends to recommend videos that are similar to what people have already watched. So depending on which side of the aisle you're on, let's say you start from like a moderate content creator. So in the realm of politics, I would imagine Shoe on Head would be a pretty moderate leftist. Now if you start watching a bit of Shoe on Head, you know, she will eventually take you down a rabbit hole, not with her intention, but the recommended algorithm should take you down to more extreme left content creators. And the same can go for the right content creator. So over time, because of how these algorithms work, and they're just designed to feed you what you want to consume, you're going to go down the pipelines of whatever it is on the internet, of possible extremism. So they say it does recommend videos that mostly match a user's ideology. And for right-leaning users, those videos often come from channels that promote extremism, conspiracy theories, and other types of problematic content. So again, I just want to name the possible political bias of this article might be more left-leaning than we want to look at. But of course, the actual research is salient. So the research team created 100,000 sock puppet accounts on YouTube to test the platform's recommendation. A sock puppet is an automated account that mimics an actual person using the platform, just like actual YouTube users. Altogether, these sock puppets watched nearly 10 million YouTube videos from 120,000 channels that reflected ideological categories from the far left to the far right. To identify the political slant of a YouTube channel, the team cross-referenced the Twitter accounts of political figures that each channel followed. So each of the actual sock puppet accounts watched 100 randomly sampled videos from its assigned ideology for 30 seconds each. After watching the videos, the sock puppet's homepage recommendations were collected. The up next recommendations for a randomly selected video were also collected. and these showed what videos a real user would likely watch by passively following the video recommendation. So what you see on the right-hand side of the video player. So in their research, extremist content effectively becomes self-reinforcing. Without requiring any additional input from people using the platform, the recommendations on their own can activate a cycle of exposure to more and more problematic videos. And again, this is coming from Muhammad Haroon, a doctoral student in computer science in the College of Engineering. Ultimately, at the end, it's not just YouTube that causes it. And it's interesting to me that YouTube, X, and Meta were actually completely absent from being called by the Oversight Committee. I don't know whether they've been kissing the ass of the administration too hard, but if you're gonna call any of these social media services, you better just call fucking all of them. I feel like this came from a real political heaviness. There are plenty of left-leaning creators that have said some wild shit on Twitch. Enough to the point that Dan Clancy ends up getting this letter. Dear Dan Clancy, this is the CEO of Twitch, by the way. The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform requests your testimony at a hearing on Wednesday, October 8th, 2025, at 10 a.m. in room HVC 2010. The hearing will examine radicalization of online forum users, including incidents of open incitement to commit violent, politically motivated acts. So, again, I think a lot of this is coming from a place of political motivation as well. And this is not good to me to see for one reason and one reason only. If this was if this was done like without if this was done outside the vacuum of the Charlie Kirk assassination, I would be all for it, simply because extremism occurs realistically on both sides of the spectrum, right? You know, extremism is never good. You always want to have people that are willing to engage in debates. You never want to have people writing ooh on fucking, bullets and sending them into people's hearts. That's not how you fucking handle any form of discourse. Radicalization is bad no matter what. Simple as that. You don't want to deal with any of it. But I feel like for them specifically targeting platforms like Twitch is interesting when I see the same amount of radicalization on platforms like X, Meta, or even YouTube to an extent. Lots of these social media platforms are bad when it comes to their fucking algorithms and where they push users. But this whole oversight, to me at least, feels like it's coming simply by using this poor guy's death. All right, simple as that. Like, this guy's death is being used as a way to push a new control on people's free speech. Because ultimately, if the government is going after this stuff, and it's not just this, there are other situations as well. Now, I'd be interested to see how Dan Clancy and a lot of these CEOs handle their, apparent, oversight committee meeting, because ultimately they're going to have to go up in front and testify and explain what kind of extremist content exists. And I'm sure that they'll probably bring up just as many examples for the right as they should bring for the left, as they should bring for anything. There should just be extremist things. Ultimately, I think a lot of these guys have probably let certain things go on their platform that should have been moderated a long time ago. Ultimately, look, I said this like a year ago, or 2 years ago, however long ago, that ultimately if these platforms don't equally and properly enforce their terms of service, especially when it comes to political extremism, like, people are getting really comfortable by, just saying, hey, this person needs to die, this person is the worst thing in the world. There's a lot of extremism that is building up and bubbling. It's not just that extreme left, it's also the extreme right, and it's been like this for fucking years. Engaging online and having a healthy debate is just a thing of the past. And that's where I think a lot of these, when this committee comes together and discusses this, I hope ultimately we reach some level of healthy consensus, and it's not just used as a vector to attack free speech and just start policing what's going to go down. Look, for me, I've already seen what's been going on the last few months with internet censorship, internet control, chat control, and for years, I've always been talking and raising awareness about how the government wants to start controlling and monitoring the speech that we have on the internet constantly. And I think there is no better tragedy than Charlie Kirk's assassination than to be the possible reason that the government is going to use to really start surveilling us even harder. That's at least what I think is going to be the way forward. All this talk about let's address the extremism, let's talk about this Discord application or Steam or any of this shit is a smokescreen for the government to, in my opinion, start invoking more control on our speech, start monitoring what we say, just so that,
Give me them chips.
They really can make us act a lot differently or just
on,
keep
man,
us
keep up.
subjugated in the last bastion of true online freedom. At least that's where I'm kind of getting to. And if it's one thing that, I may never agree with a lot of things that Charlie Kirk would have said, but if it's one thing I think me and him probably could find really good common ground on is free speech is important. Debate is obviously very important. And the government should not be this involved, or the government should really not be trying to define what the fuck free speech or hate speech or any of this stuff kind of is. Is there a real question to be had about actual online radicalization? Yes. But I think that everything that has surrounded this talk, given the vacuum that we're in right now, the hotbed that we're in, I think all of it's coming from a place of severely bad faith. But that's just where I have to kind of sit into it. I think a lot of these platforms are fucked right now. I think, when it comes to especially Reddit and Twitch, look, man, their TOS and their site has their sites have kind of let some of the most inflammatory shit fester for so long. And on both sides. Realistically, it's not a good situation. These sites have failed to moderate. They have failed to keep a lot of the most extreme dregs of it down. It's to a point where, I'll be real, I think Reddit, especially Reddit, I think is a place where, in some ways it could be worse than even Poll from 4chan. It can just be a terrible place to be on. And it can be a place where people just keep getting into more and more extremes depending on which communities they interact with. And Reddit could have dealt with it years ago. They honestly could have. But it's gotten to a point where, the government is now calling their CEOs, and they're probably going to try pushing for ways to have more control over our speech, more control on our systems. And I never see any form of, anytime the government wants to govern us harder, Daddy, it always seems like a bad thing to me, okay? But then again, who knows? Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.
Sunday, May 13th, 1917. World War I was raging in Europe, and three shepherd kids, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta, were tending their flocks near the small Portuguese town of Fatima, when suddenly they claimed to see a beautiful woman, more brilliant than the sun, made of light, holding a rosary in her hand. They believed they were seeing the Virgin Mary herself. Among other things, Mary urged them to recite the rosary every day, warned them that they would need to suffer for the conversion of sinners, and instructed them to come back to the exact same spot on the 13th of each month for the next 6 months. Which they did, and with each visit, more and more villagers followed. By the 13th of July, September, and October, the crowds had swelled so much that the child visionaries had trouble reaching the same spot that Mary had first appeared. By now, some villagers had already identified the three kids as saints, kneeling before them, asking for healing or the safe return of their loved ones from the Great War. Then, on October 13th, an estimated 70,000 people gathered for what was to be the Virgin's final visit. Lucia had asked for a miracle so that all might believe. The day began with heavy rain, but as the hour approached, witnesses recalled her shouting, "Be quiet, Our Lady is coming." The rain stopped, the clouds parted, and Lucia cried, "Look at the sun." According to a number of reports, some even coming from professional journalists, most of the crowd saw some sort of solar phenomenon. Reports described the sun trembling and dancing, casting waves of colored light over the fields. Some said they saw the Virgin's face, others described the sun spinning like a wheel and plunging toward the earth. Reports soon appeared in Portuguese newspapers claiming that the phenomena were witnessed not only at the site, but also by people as far as 40 kilometers away. Scholars and skeptics over the decades have offered various naturalistic explanations for the so-called miracle of the sun. Unusual weather conditions, retinal effects from staring directly at the sun for too long, or even what social psychologists of religion might describe as the power of collective effervescence. When a large group of people, primed by anticipation and shared belief, report extraordinary perceptions during moments of intense religious ritual and emotion. Yet for the tens of thousands who stood in that field, and for the millions who have since made pilgrimage to Fatima, the event remains what the children first said it was: a Marian apparition. In her classic analysis of Marian apparitions, the scholar Sandra Zimdar-Swartz defines an apparition as a specific kind of vision in which a person or being not normally within the visionary's perceptual range appears to that person, not in a world apart as in a dream, and not as a modification of a concrete object as is the case of a weeping icon or moving statue, but as part of the environment, without apparent connection to verifiable visual stimuli. That's a lot, so let's break it down. First, an apparition involves a figure outside the normal normal range of perception, someone or something that the visionary would not ordinarily see. Second, it's not like dreaming. The figure appears during waking life, often vividly, though some experiences do involve trance-like states or altered states of consciousness. Third, the apparition is not just a change in an existing object. This sets apparitions apart from other kinds of visions that are very common across the different branches of Christianity, like when statues or icons are believed to bleed, move, or ooze oil. This also rules out seeing Mary or Jesus in an object or piece of food.
But how about the Virgin Mary in some salsa?
Finally, and most crucially, there's no clear physical cause. There's no projector hidden in the bushes. No lights, no tricks, at least not any that can be verified. The figure simply appears, unaccounted for by the normal laws of vision or physics. Now, to be clear, I'm not here to try to debunk these experiences. That's not the point of this video. On this channel, I do examine religion from a naturalistic perspective, but that does not mean we're out to prove or disprove anyone's vision. Instead, we're interested in how these stories are told, how they're received, and what they can tell us about the broader religious, cultural, or political worlds in which they happen. Thousands of people have reported seeing the Virgin Mary in this way. These Marian apparitions are mostly a Catholic phenomenon, but not exclusively. Other Christian traditions report their own encounters, such as the Coptic Orthodox Church. One of the most famous examples took place at St. Mary's Coptic Church in a suburb of Cairo called Zaytun. Between 1968 and 1970, crowds of people, including Christians and Muslims, claimed to see a glowing, luminous woman standing or gliding across the church's domes. Purported photos of the Zaytun apparitions are easy to find online, but they're messy evidence. Most are blurry or overexposed, many seem to be copies of newspaper pages, and the originals or negatives are not available for study. Skeptics over the years have criticized them, for example accusing the image that appears on Wikipedia of being an illustration superimposed onto a real photo. That said, to my knowledge, scholars have not conducted any forensic analyses of these photos. The only sustained scholarly eyewitness account we have comes from Dr. Cynthia Nelson, who was an anthropologist at the American University in Cairo at the time. She visited the church several times in 1968. One night she wrote, "When I looked to where the crowds were pointing, I too thought I saw a light through the branches of the trees, and as I tried to picture a nun-like figure in those branches, I could trace the outline of a figure. But as I thought to myself that this is just an illusion of the light reflecting through the branches, the image of the nun would leave my field of vision." On another visit, she reported intermittent flashes of light, and the crowd's response was electric. They clapped and shouted, "There she is, there she is." For her, the mystery was not whether people were experiencing something, they clearly were, but the question remains what that something actually was. She could not identify the source of the lights, though she noticed how quickly observers' expectations turned ambiguous lights into the Virgin herself. So from this we can see that Marian apparitions can be both public and private. Sometimes Mary is said to appear to a lone visionary with no one else around to confirm the experience. Other times the vision is shared, whether by a small group or a massive crowd, as was the case at Fatima or Zaytun. There's also a kind of middle ground case, where Mary is said to appear to a single visionary who alone sees and converses with her, but the encounter takes place in a public setting like during a prayer. In these examples, a seer sometimes has an ecstatic, trance-like experience in front of a group of people and transmits a spoken message to those around. Such was the case for Estela Ruiz, who was profiled in the book The Virgin of the Barrio by the scholar of religion Christy Nopon Warren. Ruiz experienced both personal apparitions and public scheduled ones throughout the 1990s, which occurred monthly at a shrine she built in her backyard, purportedly at Mary's request. Another visionary, Maria Paula Acuna, sees Mary appear monthly in California's Mojave Desert, as chronicled by the scholar Lisa Patel in the book Our Lady of the Rock. But during the first 1,000 years of Christianity's history, the most commonly recorded apparitions were not of Mary. Reports usually described saints, angels, or other holy figures appearing to monks, nuns, or clergy, as in people who were already considered to be especially devout. But during the 11th and 12th centuries, reported sightings of Mary started to increase in Western Christianity. For example, in 1214, the Spanish priest Saint Dominic was said to have received a vision of the Virgin Mary. According to later tradition, Mary appeared to him holding a rosary and instructed him to use it as a tool for prayer and preaching, especially in his efforts to combat heresy in southern France. This story became foundational for the Dominican order, linking the rosary directly to St. Dominic's mission and giving the practice a powerful origin story. The surge of Marian apparitions coincided with a broader boom in devotion to the Virgin Mary during the Middle Ages. St. Francis of Assisi is also said to have seen Mary atop a ladder reaching into heaven. though with the notable exception of Our Lady of Guadalupe in 1531, which we'll examine later, reports of Marian apparitions dropped sharply after the medieval period. In fact, nearly 3 centuries separate Guadalupe from the next wave of major apparitions in the 19th century. Scholars aren't entirely sure why this drop-off happened. One possibility is that it was because of the fallout from the Protestant Reformation, when Catholic authority, including its claims of miracles and divine signs, were increasingly contested. But regardless, sightings of Mary came roaring back in the 19th and 20th centuries. Hundreds and hundreds were reported, not only in Europe, but around the world, including in Japan, Vietnam, Rwanda, Ecuador, and the US. One of the most famous apparitions took place in Lourdes, France, a town in the foothills of the Pyrenees Mountains. In 1858, a 14-year-old girl named Bernadette reported seeing the Virgin Mary. While she was gathering wood near a grotto, she saw a blinding white light and a figure she described as a lady wearing a white veil. Over the next few months, Bernadette reported 18 appearances of her. At one of these visitations, Mary instructed her to dig into the rocky ground of the grotto. Bernadette obeyed and scraped at the ground until she uncovered a small pool of muddy water. Witnesses describe her drinking from it and smearing some of the mud on her face, which she explained were directed by the Lady of the Vision. Later that same day, locals dug deeper into the spot and uncovered a flowing stream. Within days, people began taking bottles of the water back to Lourdes because they thought it had healing power, and within a few weeks, reports of miraculous cures were starting to circulate, and written accounts describe pilgrims arriving to the grotto to collect samples of the water. On the final appearance on March 25, 1858, Bernadette returned to the grotto. Only about 20 people were present that morning as she prayed the rosary and greeted the mysterious lady she had been seeing for weeks. Up until this point, Bernadette simply referred to the lady as that one, without claiming outright that it was Mary. But when Bernadette asked the woman to reveal her name, the figure replied, "I am the Immaculate Conception," which refers to the tradition of Mary's own conception in her mother Anne, when she was preserved from original sin from the very first moment of her existence. A local bishop declared the visions worthy of belief, and Lourdes became one of the most famous pilgrimage sites in the world, and Bernadette herself was canonized as a saint in 1933. And Lourdes was not an isolated case. In the span of about a century, a series of major apparitions captured Catholic imagination. Catherine Labouraire's vision in Paris in 1830, La Salette in 1846, Lourdes in 1858, Knock in Ireland in 1879, and Fatima in Portugal in 1917. There were also a pair of lesser-known but church-approved apparitions in Belgium in 1932 and 1933. Looking back, Pope Pius XII described the 1800s as the century of Marian predilection. One Catholic scholar has called the years 1830 to 1933 a golden age of apparitions. Others even refer to the period after 1830 as the Marian Age, because there was such a spike in Mary-focused devotion. But scholars of religion have noticed a big difference between the modern Marian apparitions and the medieval ones. First, modern apparitions often involved multiple appearances, sometimes even at scheduled times. Remember, at Fatima, the 3 kids reported that the Virgin Mary appeared to them on the 13th day of each month from May through October of 1917. Bernadette reported 18 visitations from Mary over the span of a few weeks. Scholars classify these as serial apparitions. Now, this is not entirely unique to the Marian age. As we'll see, Juan Diego reported multiple encounters with the Virgin of Guadalupe in 1531, but the pattern became especially prominent in the 19th and 20th centuries, helping to build momentum around each site and drawing crowds of pilgrims. Second, modern apparitions generally visited non-clergy, including laypeople who were not particularly religious or even appearing to non-Christians. And as we've already seen, many of the most famous Marian apparitions of the last 200 years came to kids, like the shepherd kids in La Salette, Bernadette in Lourdes, or Lucia and her cousins near Fatima. Then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, before he became Pope Benedict XVI, suggested that Mary appears to the young because their souls are not yet disturbed and their interior powers of perception not yet dulled by the noise and concerns of adult life, making them more open to perceiving what he calls the deeper dimensions of reality. Though scholars of religion approach it differently, focusing on the social dynamics at play. The fact that modern Marian apparitions so often involve kids, laypeople, or marginalized figures highlights a fascinating interaction between individual experience and institutional authority. Anthropologists and sociologists of religion have long observed that visionary experiences across basically all religions can redistribute religious authority. A non-elite visionary can grant power and a public voice to people who otherwise lack official standing in a particular institution. When Mary is said to appear to someone without education, wealth, or clerical standing, the message to everyone else is pretty clear. Divine truth is not the monopoly of the elites. Instead, it can erupt into the lives of ordinary people. Few cases illustrate this more vividly than the 16th century apparition to Juan Diego in Mexico. In 1531, Mary is said to have appeared to an indigenous man named Juan Diego on Tepeyac Hill, outside of Tenochtitlan, what is now Mexico City. According to accounts compiled around a century later, she appeared as a young indigenous woman clothed in radiant light, speaking the native language Nahuatl, and told him to build a church for her there on that hill. Diego took the news back to the local bishop, but the bishop dismissed it and demanded proof. Mary then appeared to Diego 3 more times over the next few days. As a sign, she caused Castilian roses to bloom on the hilltop, flowers not native to Mexico and blooming out of season. Diego gathered them up into his tilma, a type of cloak traditionally worn by the indigenous peoples of central Mexico, and he carried them back to the bishop. When he opened the cloak, the roses spilled out, and imprinted on the inside was a miraculous image of the Virgin. At the same time, Diego's sick uncle reported his own vision of Mary, saying that she had healed him of his illness and instructed him to insist that a church be built in her honor under the name Guadalupe. Our Lady of Guadalupe has since become a national and religious symbol of Mexico. In 1895, the Pope gave the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe on Juan Diego's cloak a canonical coronation, which is an official declaration that an image of the divine is worthy of veneration, and Diego himself was canonized as a saint in 2002. According to the scholar Timothy Montavina, the Guadalupe Basilica in Mexico City is the most visited pilgrimage site in North America, and her image is the second most reproduced sacred image in the Western Hemisphere, behind only Jesus himself. The story of Juan Diego also foreshadows something we see in later Marian apparitions. Like Bernadette at Lourdes, he was not a member of the clergy, but someone humble and socially marginalized. Both visionaries were initially dismissed and required tangible evidence to be taken seriously, and both embodied the theme of Mary choosing those without status or power as her messengers. Now, as I mentioned, scholars of religion have argued that Marian apparitions shake up the clear institutionalized power structure of the church, giving a disadvantaged, uneducated person the opportunity to speak for a divine voice. As the scholar Agnieszka Halemba writes, the very claim of the visionaries to converse with a messenger of God directly can be seen as a way to bypass the church authority and monopoly. Though clearly this is a bit of a paradox because the church ultimately makes the decision of whether to grant legitimacy to an apparition. The Guadalupe story is tricky in this respect. The earliest written accounts of Juan Diego's vision only appear more than a century after the events, in devotional texts produced by Catholic priests. The main sources of the story were published in 1648, 1649, and 1675, respectively. This means we're looking at the story through sources already shaped by colonial and missionary interests. Some historians have argued that framing the apparition around a humble indigenous convert served the colonial church's agenda, presenting Catholicism as validated by indigenous experience while simultaneously subordinating indigenous symbols and sacred spaces to the Virgin Mary. That point becomes even sharper when we consider that the hill at Tepeyac, where Juan Diego purportedly met Mary, may have already been a site dedicated to a local goddess. Some scholars suggest that the apparition story helped redirect indigenous devotion from that goddess to the Virgin Mary. In this sense, Guadalupe could function both as a source of empowerment for indigenous believers, giving them a figure who spoke their language and appeared on their land, and as a tool of colonization, folding local religiosity into the authority of the Catholic Church. The art historian Jeanette Favreau-Peterson makes this point in her aptly named article, The Virgin of Guadalupe, Symbol of Conquest or Liberation. She argues in colonial Mexico, the Virgin of Guadalupe was continually reinterpreted by the ruling powers whenever political institutions were in flux. At times, she symbolized liberation. At other times, accommodation and control. Her image served elites as much as it served indigenous believers. In short, she embodied both conquest and liberation, simultaneously sanctioning colonial hierarchies while at the same time offering a figure through whom ordinary people could imagine divine solidarity. Overall, the Guadalupe story shows how apparitions can carry deep social weight, with ordinary people spontaneously becoming visionaries, being accepted by the people. But ultimately, the church decides what's legitimate. This brings us to the theological framework the Catholic Church uses to authorize apparitions. From a Catholic theological standpoint, Marian apparitions are categorized as private revelations. This sets them apart from public revelation, which refers to God's act of revealing himself to humanity, which finds its literary expression in the Old and New Testaments. Public revelation is understood to have unfolded gradually, and it's also considered completed. Nothing can be added to it. What continues to develop over time is the Church's understanding of the public revelation, through study, prayer, and the teaching authority of the Church. This distinction is laid out clearly in the Message of Fatima, a document authored in 2000 under Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI. He explains how the Fatima apparitions fit within Catholic teaching on revelation. In his words, the authority of private revelations is essentially different from that of the definitive public revelation. Private revelation is a help to this faith, and shows its credibility by leading one back to the definitive public revelation. In other words, no apparition, no matter how celebrated, adds new doctrine to the faith. Even approved apparitions are never binding articles of faith. A Catholic can fully practice the faith without believing the apparitions of Lourdes, Fatima, or Guadalupe. At the same time, the Church may recognize certain apparitions as worthy of belief, acknowledging their role in inspiring devotion. As the Catechism of the Catholic Church puts it, apparitions or private revelations, some of which have been recognized by the authority of the Church, their role is not to improve or complete Christ's definitive revelation, but to live more fully by it in a certain period of history. So how does the Church decide whether an apparition is worthy of belief? The Catholic Church approaches these claims with caution and a structured process. In 1978, the Vatican issued official guidelines to help bishops discern reports of apparitions. And the investigation is often lengthy and can sometimes stretch across years or even decades. Most of the time, the responsibility first falls to the local bishop of the diocese where the apparition is reported. The bishop may convene a commission of experts, theologians, canon lawyers, psychologists, and medical doctors. Together, they examine a few things: the character of the visionary, their psychological health, the content of the reported message to make sure nothing contradicts Catholic faith or morals, and the fruit of the apparition. So basically, whether it's inspiring true devotion and leads to conversions or even producing healings or miracles. Eyewitnesses are interviewed at length, and any supposed miracles are carefully documented. At the end of the process, the bishop has three options. He can declare constat de supernaturalitate, that the apparition is of supernatural origin, and therefore worthy of belief. Or he can rule constat de non supernaturalitate, as in definitely not supernatural, whether it's a hoax, a mistake, or just some natural phenomenon being misinterpreted. But the most common verdict is actually the middle ground. Non constat, meaning that the case is not confirmed as supernatural, but it's not ruled out either. The Church essentially takes a wait-and-see approach. If an apparition, though, is judged authentic, it gets formally approved as worthy of belief. That means that Catholics are free to believe it and to take part in devotions connected to it. If it's judged false, though, the Church will forbid public devotion at the site and warn the faithful to stay away. But even when the apparition is approved, it's never elevated to dogma. As Pope Benedict XVI explained, approval simply means the message contains nothing contrary to faith, and it may actually help people grow in the faith. But the vast majority of apparitions reported over the past 2 centuries have not even been investigated by the Church at all, and it seems unlikely that they're high on any bishop's priority list. In a sense, though, that silence is itself a message. By doing nothing, the Church avoids endorsing potentially controversial visions while letting popular devotion quietly continue on its own. Out of hundreds of Marian apparition claims, only a small number have earned official recognition. According to America Magazine, in the past century alone, more than 1,500 alleged visions of Mary were reported worldwide, but fewer than 20 have been officially recognized as genuine. The major approved apparitions are well known: Guadalupe, Lourdes, Fatima, each with their own extensive church-endorsed devotions and even basilicas. But others have been explicitly rejected. For example, take the case of Gianna Talone Sullivan in Emmitsburg, Maryland. Beginning in the 1990s, she claimed to receive daily messages from the Virgin Mary, including one public message every Thursday night during prayer services at a parish near Baltimore. The gatherings grew rapidly, attracting several hundred people every week. At these events, Sullivan would go into prayer, announce that she had received a new message from Mary, and then have it read aloud to those present. In September 2000, after a lengthy investigation, the Archdiocese of Baltimore formally ruled against her claims. Church authorities met with Sullivan and announced that they found no basis for the alleged apparitions. They ordered the Thursday night prayer meetings to be discontinued, and they banned the promotion of Sullivan's messages, including a video titled Unbridled Mercy that was circulating among her followers. Whether or not an apparition is accepted as credible depends a lot on what Mary is purported to say. Sometimes she's silent, but other stories describe her as giving messages. When Mary appeared in 1846 to 2 shepherd kids on the mountainside in La Salette, France, she was said to have told them that her son was angry that people were forsaking the Sabbath, not attending Mass, and not praying regularly. She also told the kids to pray and to say Our Father and Hail Mary at least twice daily, as well as to tell their employers. As you can see, Mary can be quite specific in her wishes. In the case of Emmitsburg, Maryland, though, the Archdiocese of Baltimore explained that some of her messages included apocalyptic predictions and theological claims that could not be reconciled with Catholic teaching. This episode illustrates that the Church is willing to oppose apparition claims when they show signs of fraud, fanaticism, doctrinal error, or even psychological instability in the seer. They weigh evidence, interview witnesses, and perhaps most importantly, they watch what happens over time. They figure that true Marian apparitions should yield good fruit, deeper faith, moral conversion, and even miracles. What it should not produce is division or chaos. But Marian apparitions don't occur in a cultural vacuum. They often erupt at flashpoints of social and political tension, and the messages or imagery they carry usually reflect those contexts. think of Guadalupe in 16th century Mexico. Mary's appearance to an indigenous man, speaking an indigenous language, on a former shrine to an indigenous goddess, must be understood in the context of the Spanish conquest and the subsequent campaigns of conversion and religious syncretism that was already underway. At Lourdes in 1858, the Virgin identified herself as the Immaculate Conception, just 4 years after Pope Pius IX had declared that doctrine dogma, making the apparition feel like divine confirmation of that teaching. The apparitions at Fatima in 1917 unfolded against the backdrop of World War I and fear of communism in Russia following the February Revolution of 1917 and Lenin's return to Russia in April of that year. According to Lucia, Mary delivered her most dramatic message on July 13, 1917. In memoirs written decades later, Lucia recalled that Mary specifically mentioned Russia. She claimed that Mary warned that if the world did not repent, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the church. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she will be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. This shows that Marian apparitions reflect their social and political contexts, which brings us to one of the most unusual and controversial modern examples: the town of Medjugorje in what is now Bosnia-Herzegovina. Back in June of 1981, it was still part of Yugoslavia, and 6 kids ranging from the age of 10 to 16 started claiming almost daily appearances of the Virgin Mary. Now, unlike most Marian apparitions, which are relatively short-lived, the visions of Medjugorje did not stop after a few days or weeks. Some of the visionaries reported seeing Mary daily, and several claimed the apparitions continue to this day, more than 40 years later. The Medjugorje visions quickly developed their own distinctive features that scholars call Marian apocalypticism. According to the visionaries, the Virgin of Medjugorje often calls herself the Queen of Peace, and she often appeared in tears, pleading for humanity and warning about the state of the world. The visionaries also spoke of receiving secrets, 10 secrets revealed respectively to each visionary that touched not only on their personal lives but also the fate of the church and the entire world. These secrets are still only partially revealed and have fueled speculation about coming trials and apocalyptic punishments, and devotees are convinced that some global catastrophes could be delayed or softened through prayer. One of the seers, Mirjana Dragachevich, has hinted that one of these hidden messages spoke of a global danger that was ultimately avoided because of the fasting and prayers of the faithful. Many followers have interpreted her words as a reference to the Cold War, the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, and the breakup of Yugoslavia. So again, like other Marian apparitions, some of the visions of Medjugorje reflect the social and political reality of the time. But Medjugorje also shows how complicated the road to recognition can be. Unlike other apparitions which gained church approval within a few years, Medjugorje remained in limbo for more than 40 years. Local bishops long doubted the visionaries' claims, and even Pope Francis himself in 2017 joked that he preferred Mary as a mother and not a telegraph operator, sending out daily messages. Some Vatican investigators even suggested the phenomenon was deceptive rather than divine. And yet, the devotion kept growing. Millions of pilgrims continued to climb Apparition Hill, attend Mass at St. James Church, and join in prayer vigils. By some counts, Mary has allegedly appeared more than 40,000 times since 1981, and according to site statistics, 1.7 million communion wafers were distributed in a single year, which I guess is one way to get an official head count. Then in September 2024, the Vatican finally gave a cautious green light, issuing a nihil obstat, literally no objection. Now, to be clear, this does not mean the Vatican suddenly declared Our Lady of Medjugorje as authentic. What it did say was that people are now free to go there, pray, and treat it as a place of devotion. Their decision was largely based on what they considered were abundant and widespread fruits of the visions. Couples patching up their marriages, reports of healings, new charities for the poor being founded, etc., etc. So the church essentially said, we're not vouching for every message that these seers are claiming to receive, but we can't deny the devotion here is bearing fruit. This long road to partial recognition illustrates again the tensions that apparitions can reveal between the laity and the clergy, the charismatic authority of a visionary versus the institutional authority of the church. The survival of an apparition site often depends less on official pronouncements than on the devotion of the faithful. In fact, scholars like Peter Jan Margry point out that the number of claimed apparitions has exploded in recent decades, but especially since the mid-1900s, this growing wave of visions have come from believers who are not aligned with the Catholic Church's teachings or its its modern practices. These modern apparitions and their followings function as vehicles for alternative religious voices, ways of imagining Mary as an intercessor but outside of the official channels of the church. And while many of these non-mainstream revelatory Marian movements never gain official recognition, their impact is very real. Once an apparition is broadly accepted, even informally, it can spark an entire movement of popular piety and create major pilgrimage destinations. Medjugorje is the clearest example. Whatever the Vatican's hesitations, the apparitions there fueled a devotional culture throughout the 1980s and 1990s. A culture that transformed a poor Yugoslav farming village into a hub of global Catholic tourism. Hotels, restaurants, travel agencies, and entire industries sprang up to serve the millions of pilgrims who come seeking peace, healing, or a personal encounter with Mary. Today, the towns of Lourdes and Fatima also attract several million pilgrims each year, which has literally reshaped these once remote villages. Lourdes today is a town of only 15,000 residents, but it hosts 5 to 6 million visitors each year, second only to Paris when it comes to hotel capacity in France. The local economy revolves almost entirely around religious tourism, generating an estimated 300 million euros each year. In Fatima, on the major anniversary dates of May 13th and October 13th, up to 1 million people gather to pray, an astonishing number that transforms the landscape into a sea of candlelight. And church leaders sometimes worry about these so-called pilgrimage economies overshadowing more lofty goals. The Vatican's caution with Medjugorje was partly because the ongoing visions coincided with thriving commerce, raising the cynical question, if the apparition stopped, would the visitors and income stop too? Yet historically, sacred pilgrimage sites have always given rise to local economies that can stick around for centuries. So the legacy of Marian apparitions is vast. They leave physical legacies like basilicas, shrines, hospitals, and tourist economies, as well as intangible legacies like devotional practices and cultural symbols. They also continually pose a challenge, the tension between folk practice and institutional authority, which sometimes yields interesting results when the church finds an apparition legitimate. Mary may appear to a little girl, but then popes and bishops come as pilgrims to bow at the spot. In 1982, Pope John Paul II traveled to Fatima to thank Mary after surviving an assassin's bullet, a bullet which now is ensconced in the crown of the Fatima statue. And even Pope Francis, while famously skeptical of those Medjugorje visions, went to Marian shrines and spoke of Mary as a mother who runs to meet us in our needs. So apparitions have entered the highest echelons of devotion while still remaining essentially a grassroots phenomenon. Though Marian apparitions can look very different depending on who's telling the story, and the same is true about today's news cycle. That's why I use today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that lets you compare how thousands of news outlets across the political spectrum are covering the same story. If you're frustrated by echo chambers or just want to understand how different communities are reacting to the headlines, Ground News makes it easy. You can scroll through a single story and instantly see the political bias of the sources reporting, as well as who owns the different outlets and their factuality ratings. For example, here's one of today's stories on Ground News. President Trump is filing a $15 billion defamation case against the New York Times. Over here, Ground News has aggregated hundreds of sources reporting on the story. Scroll down and you can see the biased distribution chart. This shows that coverage is fairly evenly split across left, right, and center, though slightly less coverage is coming from the right. Scroll down again and you can see that the majority of these sources are rated as highly factual. And here we have the ownership chart that shows a big chunk of these sources are owned by media conglomerates, followed by wealthy private owners and independent sources. Ground News also enables you to easily compare the headlines to see how each side is framing the story. On the left, Raw Story includes a quote from one of the lawyers they interviewed. Trump makes midnight announcement of stunningly pathological $15 billion lawsuit. Meanwhile, on the right, Breitbart highlights Trump's own words. Trump launches $15 billion lawsuit against New York Times, allowed to freely lie, smear, and defame me. Same event, completely different framing, and Ground News lays it all out for you side by side, so instead of bouncing between apps or scrolling endlessly on social media, you can see the full picture in one place. I've been using Ground News for a while now, and I love how it helps me break out of my media bubble and understand bigger conversations happening around any major headline. So if you want to be a more informed news consumer, check out Ground News today. Head to ground.news/religion for breakfast or click the link in the description below to get 40% off their Vantage plan. Again, that's ground.news/religion for breakfast. Thanks, everyone.
You in it for life, huh?
Welcome to Prison, this is Anton, and in this video we're going to be discussing some of the recent discoveries coming from, well, right here, the neighborhood of planet Earth. Because once again we have a relatively cool new discovery. A previously unknown quasi-moon of our own planet that's been silently flying next to our planet for nearly 60 years without anybody noticing. And so this little space rock, now referred to as 2025 PN7, is the newest addition to Earth's special group of companions that we actually refer to as quasi-moons. And so in this video, let's discuss exactly what we have right here, how this was discovered, and what we know about all of these objects already. But I guess first, so what exactly is a quasi-moon, and why is this discovery so fascinating? Well, the first, I guess, let's be very clear. This is not an actual moon, or at least not the moon in the same way as this moon. Our moon is gravitationally bound to Earth, meaning that Earth's gravity is the main force controlling its orbit around us. A quasi-moon is different. It's an object that technically orbits the Sun, just like our own planet, but the thing is here it completes its orbit around the Sun in exactly the same amount of time as our own planet. Usually almost exactly 1 year. And so technically it's just sharing the orbit with our own planet. But it's still referred to as a quasi-moon for one important reason. From our perspective on our own planet, this object still appears to be circling around the planet, but just in a slightly different shape that does not resemble a simple circle. And the orbit here can be pretty unique and quite dramatic, but normally it resembles something like this. And so even though it looks like it's orbiting us, in reality it's mostly influenced by the Sun's gravity and not the gravity of Earth. As a matter of fact, it's not truly captured by Earth's gravity almost at all, and instead appears to have this synchronized dance with planet Earth around the Sun. And because of this, these orbits are usually not really stable and are technically temporary. So these objects don't stay with us forever and usually go somewhere else within a few centuries. And also it's important to note that this is different from a mini-moon. Mini-moons are small asteroids that are temporarily captured by Earth's gravity and orbit around the planet for some time, and these objects do become actual temporary moons that may stay here for several months or possibly even several years. But eventually the gravitational disruptions from the larger moon, or I guess the moon, dislodge them from here permanently, and then they go somewhere else. And so in contrast, these quasi-moons never directly orbit our own planet, and instead have their own solar orbits. And as you can see, as of 2025, Earth now has 8 officially confirmed quasi-satellites, few of which we've discussed before because some of them are really exciting. We'll discuss them in a few minutes. But I guess first let's talk about this new discovery, 2025 PN7, and what we know about it so far. And so first of all, how exactly was this found? Well, it turns out that this was completely by accident and discovered by an amateur astronomer, and actually a French journalist on top of this, Adrien Coffinet, who posted this on August 30th on the Minor Planet mailing list, essentially informing everyone that there seems to be something else going on here, and there seems to be a new object nobody knew existed. And this was initially spotted by the Panther Observatory in Hawaii on August 2nd. And within just a few days, we received first confirmation of its existence, with a study right here confirming that this seems to be an asteroid, but also it was a moon of Earth. And what's truly mind-boggling here is that scientists digging through the data discovered that it seems to have assumed this orbit at least 60 years ago. In other words, it remained unseen by every single telescope on Earth for at least 6 decades, with some calculations even suggesting that it might have been much longer. But there's an obvious explanation for why we haven't seen it until now. It seems to be pretty small, only about 19 meters or 62 feet across, and basically representing one of the smallest asteroids we've ever seen. This is basically the size of a bus, and is even smaller than the asteroid that exploded over Chelyabinsk in Russia in 2013. And so this is actually quite an accidental discovery. But based on its orbit, now we know that it seems to belong to a certain family of asteroids, referred to as the Arjuna asteroids, which are all near-Earth asteroids, and all seem to have an orbit very similar to planet Earth. Although right now this group is pretty small, and is also kind of mysterious because we're not sure where it came from. Although we'll talk about their potential origin in a few minutes. And so because it's so small and not very reflective, it is incredibly faint. Its brightness magnitude is about 26, and that means it's only visible with some of the most powerful optical telescopes, which is why nobody has seen it until now. And that of course also makes you wonder how many other similar rocks very likely share its orbit and remain completely hidden. But based on the orbital analysis, we know that during its closest approach to Earth, it seems to come within about 299,000 kilometers, or essentially 1 light second, But this only happens very rarely. On average, or usually, it's anywhere from 4.5 to 59 million kilometers away from us, and so it doesn't really get any gravitational effects from our planet or from the moon. But because of its size, it also seems to be the smallest and potentially the least stable known quasi-satellite, and so it's very likely going to be dislodged in the next 120 to 130 years. So this is probably going to be the first quasi-satellite to disappear and to go somewhere else. And so because of this discovery, our own planet now has 8 quasi-satellites. And each new discovery here helps us understand the sheer variety and complex dynamics of these somewhat bizarre objects. And perhaps the most famous of these objects is the one you can learn about in one of the videos in the description, discovered in 2016. This is 2016 HO3, also known as Kamo'oelewa. Yeah, try saying that 5 times. And this object is super exciting because it seems to be relatively stable, and is predicted to stay in its orbit for at least several hundred years. But what makes it super special is one of the recent discoveries in regards to its surface composition. It seems to be almost identical to the moon, with studies suggesting that it potentially came from the moon and was possibly a fragment ejected from a powerful impact, very likely forming one of the craters, in this case the one known as Giordano Bruno. This crater formed millions of years ago. And this right here potentially presents us with one explanation for where most of these objects came from. In other words, a lot of these objects that seem to share very similar orbits have a very high chance of just being ejected rocks from the moon itself. And so a lot of these distant asteroids are just the result of moon's violent past. And what's really exciting is that within the next 2 years, we're almost certainly going to know for sure how this quasi-moon was formed and if it really came from the moon. And that's because China's Tianwen-2 mission, that was launched very recently, is planning to visit this rock and very likely collect one of the samples from its surface. And since it's going to bring them back in 2027, there's a very high chance that by then we're going to know exactly where it came from. Providing direct answers about its potential lunar origin, shedding light on the early solar system, and possibly linking a lot of these other quasi-moons to what's discovered on the surface of this object, and may one day help us figure out how our planet evolved early on and what impacts and collisions it experienced, because many of these rocks potentially represent remnants of these ancient impacts. And so by studying their eccentric and sometimes chaotic orbits, it can help us understand the intricate gravitational interactions and figure out what collided with what. Naturally though, it also teaches more about these near-Earth asteroids and teaches us on how to track them, how to predict their collisions, and thus potentially avoid something risky and something dangerous, because one of these larger rocks could one day collide with our own planet. But right now, based on all the discoveries of these quasi-moons and pretty much all of the near-Earth asteroids, we know that none of them pose any danger. And you can learn more about this concept and how we know all of this in one of the videos in the description. But because of new telescopes that are even more powerful, such as the Vera Rubin Observatory that just started operating, there's a very high chance that a lot of these observatories are going to be finding a lot more of these quasi-moons in the next few years, or even additional orbital objects that will help us understand the solar system even better, and possibly help us solve a lot of secrets and a lot of mysteries that we currently do not understand. And so while this particular object is relatively small, somewhat insignificant, and will most likely dislodge and go somewhere else in the next 120 years, this discovery reminds us that even our immediate cosmic surroundings are full of surprises, and contain a lot of valuable scientific clues about the entire solar system. Although I guess the next step is going to be naming it. Right now, only one of the objects out of 8 has a name, and so hopefully the other 7 objects are going to receive names that are maybe just a little bit easier to pronounce. I mean, like Bob or Steve or something super simple. Because Kawalelowa is not a name I enjoy pronouncing every time I make a video about it. But yeah, if you have a really cool idea for a potential name for this object, I don't know, maybe leave it in a comment below. But anyway, until we learn something else, or until something else very similar is discovered in some of the future surveys, that's pretty much all I wanted to mention. Thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads and can DM me directly, or by joining the channel membership that grants you early access and a few more extra secret videos. Or you can also buy the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye-bye.
Clear the area. I know you didn't just try to hit me, you fool. What's up? Let's do this shit. Hey, watch it, homie. This is a residential area, man. That's mine. Let's go. Man, get them, man. What y'all waiting for? Get your fat ass up, stay close. I'm with you, CJ.
I just need a break.
There you go.
What is happening right now? Okay, that's Sauron. That's too much. Okay, that's too much. Okay, let's bail. That's too much. That's too much, bro. I gotta go. Sorry. I need a break. That's right in my face. Satanic. No, man, I'm serious. That is just right in my face, fucking satanic. I'm tripping out a little bit. Tripping out a little bit right now. Okay, come on. Let's go home. Come on, where are we at?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tim Dillon Show. We have a mind-blowing episode today. This is literally one of the most mind-blowing, probably the most mind-blowing podcast episode I've ever done. We have Whitney Webb on, who's a journalist. She's written the best articles about Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, about the powers behind Epstein. She's also written a great article about a lot of the companies that stand to profit from introducing the solutions to COVID-19. She, writes a lot about Bill Gates and his relationship with Epstein. That's what she talks about on this podcast. We also play private audio from a private phone call that Whitney had with an Epstein accuser, a victim of Epstein, Maria Farmer, who the mainstream media has reported on. But of course, the mainstream media did not report everything Maria told them. So we had permission to play the phone call. We play clips from the phone call. Whitney breaks them down and analyzes them. Some of them are incredibly shocking, very disturbing. And then Whitney goes on and talks about Gates, and she talks about a lot of factions within the United States government that plan on copying the authoritarian model that you see in China of how they've structured their society. There's this idea that in order to compete with China and still be the top of global hegemony, we need to adopt a lot of the things that China has done successfully, including trampling human rights, including moving everything to a cashless, driverless society, eliminating the ownership of private vehicles. I mean, it's really crazy when she talks about this document that came out from a Freedom of Information request about how a lot of people in the government plan to use the economic shutdown and the pandemic to usher in a lot of new rules, regulations, surveillance systems, things like that. Whitney's great. Her work is always very well researched. She's not a hysteric. She's somebody who stands behind everything she says, and it's an honor to have her here. She writes at The Last American Vagabond. That's also a YouTube channel. She also has a Patreon that you can support her work, and the link will be in the description. She has a book coming out about Jeffrey Epstein. So this is about an hour and 15-minute conversation. Again, a lot of what goes on here is fucking unbelievable. So again, there's a few jokes. It's not overall a very funny episode, but every now and then we do an episode like this to really keep you up at night. And this will absolutely 100% do that if you're not up at night already, which you should be. All right, everybody, we've got Whitney Webb. She's one of our favorites, one of the best journalists in America that doesn't live here. That's why she's better. She's written some great articles. She's written the best articles about Jeffrey Epstein. She's written a great article in The Last American Vagabond, right? Is that? Yeah, that's the site. And it's about Bill Gates, and it's about all the companies that stand to profit from all of the different solutions to coronavirus. And she's always doing a lot of research and work, and then putting out these very long, really detailed, well-researched articles on very difficult topics that a lot of people don't go into. So we're very excited to have you. Thanks for coming on the show. And I spoke to you this morning, and you said and we're going to go into Gates and stuff because obviously a lot of people saw me and Rogan kind of did that little, we had a little, little fun argument about Bill Gates, who I don't know anything about other than I've read some articles about him. And and then Rogan was like, well, Bill doesn't have any reason, he has enough money. He doesn't want any more money. But as you know, whether it's George Soros or the Koch brothers or Bill Gates, billionaires often engage in social engineering. They have an ideology. They want to impact the world. Some of it is good. A lot of it isn't. So what's interesting is like, we're going to all have to understand what Bill Gates and a lot of these people are trying to do. It should be transparent. And that was my thing with Joe. I was just basically like, listen, we all want to solve climate change, but if I said to you part of that was having a one child per family policy and you could never drive an SUV and we're going to put a cap on, the energy that you could consume, you might say, wait a minute, whoa, hold on. So we all agree nobody wants coronavirus. Everybody wants some way to prevent coronavirus, but it's the details, which is something that you're very good at. It's figuring out what the details are of these solutions quickly, because then we're going to go into this Epstein thing, but quickly, just blanket off the bat with Gates. What concerns you particularly about Bill Gates and some of the initiatives that he's pushed around the world?
All right. So Bill Gates is one of those billionaires who had a ton of money, and it took him a really long time to get involved in philanthropy. But not just speaking about Bill Gates, but so-called philanthropists in general. Since the day of the very first billionaire in the United States, John D. Rockefeller, they have tried to rebrand themselves as philanthropists. Even Jeffrey Epstein, before he was arrested the first time, used to be called philanthropist. It's been used a lot of times to basically launder a person's reputation when they get involved in odd or unsavory activities, which billionaires, we've seen over the years sometimes are prone to do, right? So as far as Gates goes, a lot of people have compared his foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to the Rockefeller Foundation, sort of as the successor to that, even though that foundation still exists in a lot of ways, focusing a lot of attention on developing countries, and some of those things that have happened, and scandals with the vaccines and all of that with Bill Gates has to do with the fact that his foundation has a lot of close ties to major pharmaceutical giants, and in some cases, some of those vaccines that were originally rejected for use in the United States ended up being sent abroad to other countries, developing countries like India, for example, where they ended up having really severe health effects on largely the girls that received them. And a lot of other controversies. I mean, vaccines in general, there's, a lot of people get really agitated when people bring up vaccines, but it's important to remember that, there can be some vaccines that are produced poorly or produced, for example, in a facility that is not up to standards and has sanitary issues, for example. And then when those vaccines are used, that can cause adverse reactions. And that is, a crime, essentially, and wrong. And there can be people that can talk about pharmaceutical corruption and not necessarily be against vaccines as a science. And what we see a lot of times is this conflation of people saying, oh, you're criticizing this particular vaccine or this particular pharmaceutical company or this particular vaccine manufacturer. You must be against all vaccines. And I don't think that's true at all. But in terms of Bill Gates, one thing I do want to point out about him is that his rhetoric over the years has been very odd when it comes to vaccines. He said, stuff at these TED Talks like, we can, bring down the world population by, if we're good on vaccines and stuff like that. And that's kind of odd, right? Presumably vaccines exist to keep people alive longer, not to reduce population. So the fact that he's talking about it that way, I think it's reasonable that people are concerned about that, especially considering, too, that he's talked about for years that he's concerned that the global population is too large, specifically in Africa. A few years ago, he was saying that he was very concerned and bothered by how many the African youth boom is the term used in the report there. And I just don't really understand why we have to be putting, trotting out this billionaire on CNN and stuff, telling us how to respond to this crisis when he doesn't have a medical degree. He's a guy that didn't even finish university. He dropped out of Harvard and then went on and became this, tech guy, massive tech billionaire because he got this deal with IBM in the 80s and all this stuff, right? but why is he giving medical advice on a massive scale? I mean, it just seems really odd. But the thing, to me, that's the biggest red flag about Gates is his relationship with Epstein. And I say this for a couple of reasons, mainly that if you look at who was one of the executors on Epstein's will, it was a guy named Boris Nikolic, who was actually Bill Gates' chief scientific advisor. There's pictures of Nikolic, Gates, and Epstein, also Larry Summers, all together palling around. And it came out, after last year, after the second Epstein arrest last year, that Epstein was very interested in eugenics. Right. I mean, this was openly admitted in mainstream media. And what I was told, what we're going to get into today about Epstein by one of his victims, is that they talked about eugenics all the time and talked about the superiority of races and how other races are lesser than others. And she was like, this is how these people think. They talked to me like this. They told me I was lesser than them, because I didn't have their DNA.
How close were Gates and Epstein personally?
Well, so there has been a huge cover-up on Gates and Epstein ties. I can say that for a fact. Because the New York Times, originally it said like they had met in 2016, and then the New York Times said, oh no, actually it was 2011, but that's a lie. And I know this because there is this article they have tried to scrub from the internet, but you can still find it if you're, persistent like I am. It's from the Evening Standard, a UK newspaper. It's from January 2001. It was written by Nigel Rosser. And in there, it talks about a whole bunch of stuff about Epstein. Of course, this was before he was controversial, right? So it says a lot of things about Epstein. It even mentions the intelligence ties. It says CIA. It says Mossad in this article, right? But one sentence that really caught my attention was Jeffrey Epstein made his millions, all his money, from his business links to these three men. And it says those three men are Leslie Wexner, Donald Trump, and the third one is Bill Gates. And this is in 2001. And so obviously, there had to have been some relationship there, right?
Right.
Before 2001.
So this is an article written in 2001 about how, and why was it written? Was it like just a piece about Jeffrey Epstein? It was some type of just biography, or what was the tone of the article?
So in this period of time, Epstein had gotten some media attention, mainly because he was seen around Prince Andrew a lot in public during this period of time. And Ghislaine Maxwell had always sort of generated interest in the British press because her father was like this hated white collar criminal, basically. Because he, raided that pension fund of the Daily Mirror and all this stuff. So she'd sort of pop up in tabloid coverage throughout the 1990s. And this article was focusing on Ghislaine and Epstein's relationship with Andrew, and was trying to say to the British public, who are these, new pals of Andrew, Prince Andrew, that we're seeing, hearing about all the time. Who are they really? And trying to find out something about them before anyone had really tried to do much of a deep dive on them, right? And so that's where this article came from. And it talks about Bill Gates openly. And the first Epstein victim to go to the FBI, Maria Farmer, who I interviewed yesterday, she said that when she was around Epstein and Ghislaine pretty much every day for like 2 years. And she said that she heard them talk about Bill Gates in 1995, like they knew him really well.
We're going to get into that interview because that's very interesting. But just in general, after looking into this information, is it your belief that it's very possible, if not probable or likely, that somebody like Bill Gates has very different views in private than the ones he's shared in public?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think all of these billionaires do. I mean, let's think about Leslie Wexner, for example. If you're going to buy the reasoning that, well, he has so much money, he doesn't need anything else. I mean, why would he do anything bad, right? A lot of times there's these people like this that get this type of money, and when they can't buy anything else, they want control. Right?
Yes.
They're about, like you said, social engineering and control, or, sort of imposing their vision of the world and what they think is best on other people.
Or telling everyone else to make sacrifices that they will never have to make. I mean, that's another big thing. Trying to, basically engineer the lives of regular people and tell them to make sacrifices where, the wealthy and the government will never be forced to make those types of sacrifices.
Well, with Bill Gates and vaccines, why did his, the pediatrician for his children come forward and say that Bill Gates refused to have his children vaccinated?
Is that true?
From what I understand, yes.
Wow. That's
but
very
mainstream
interesting.
media didn't pick it up because obviously it's, who wants Bill Gates, on your bad side?
Well, we
days,
do.
right?
We do right here. I've said that before. Come and get us. I'm kidding. Or am I? But let's get into this interview with Maria Farmer, who's an Epstein victim. She's somebody that you interviewed or spoke to on the phone for 3.5 hours, and she reached out to you because she was upset about a ruling that came down. Talk a little bit about this ruling that a lot of people don't understand the significance of. It essentially closes the door on anybody paying any price for what happened to those women.
Yeah, in a nutshell, not to get too technical on anyone, basically what it means is that someone like Ghislaine Maxwell or any other co-conspirator in what Epstein was involved in walks free, and they walk free for good. It's basically saying these people are immune to prosecution, and any Epstein victim that comes forward and tries to say this person was involved, they can't go to court.
And that ruling came down, and it was basically, I think, separating civil and criminal trials. Was it something like that?
There's so many different cases right now. So I'm not 100% sure on that. But I mean, the important takeaway is that essentially it claims that these other, the sweetheart deal, as it's called, that was negotiated. It was done. That stands. It was done correctly.
And
so
part of that deal that he got the first time was that none of his co-conspirators had to be named, like Ghislaine Maxwell.
Or they're immune, basically.
Or they're immune. So they all got immunity. So when Epstein's first deal was given out by a judge in Florida, and it was negotiated by, I believe, Acosta, who was the Secretary of Labor, he negotiated that deal for Epstein. Epstein, part of it was that none of his co-conspirators would ever have to face prosecution. That seems insane. That you would be giving blanket immunity to all his co-conspirators, but then that was the ruling that was held up recently so that Ghislaine Maxwell. So tell us a little bit about Maria Farmer and how you guys started talking.
Well, she actually contacted me a while ago, and I had just been really busy and was working on other stuff, not Epstein research, just because of like the crazy times we live in. There's so much going on, right? But then this ruling happened, and I was like, you know what? Let's talk right now. Your guys' voice matters. We need. I mean, the ruling to me is just so outrageous because it just sends this horrible message that people can get away with crimes on this scale to kids. And nothing happens to them as long as they're in bed with intelligence or organized crime or the right, billionaires. You have enough money. I mean, you can do anything you want, basically.
That is the takeaway. That certainly is the takeaway.
Right. So it's infuriating, and I was like, now's a good time. And so I had originally planned to just ask her about the ruling, and she told me, she had talked to so many reporters in mainstream media. I mean, pretty much every outlet you can think of. And they just would not tell her story. She said, every time I would bring up Wexner, they always cut it out. And she told me Wexner's the head of the snake, is what she said. She said of this whole operation, he's the head of the snake. He's the guy, he's the brains of this. He's the guy that's coordinating this all from his, mansions. This is the guy in charge, basically. And essentially, and I mean, other people have said this too. Epstein was basically just like a project manager. He was like mid-level management in terms of this scheme. People say, oh yeah, well, he's gone. So, I mean, that must mean this stopped. No way.
Right.
The people that are at the top that were doing this, Epstein was there because he was really charismatic. He could convince these girls that he was going to make their lives better. He was apparently really charming and able to bring them in. And then once they're in, I mean, the tactics these people use, I mean, mainstream media doesn't really report on that either. They wouldn't let them, they'd have to call for permission to go outside. There are all these pinhole cameras everywhere. They watch their every move. They even watch them undress to change clothes and stuff. I mean, once you're in there, it's really hard to get out. Right.
What were some of the more, when she called you, what were some of the things that, other than Wexner, what were some of the other things that she had told you that specifically mainstream media would not allow her to say or would cut out?
Well, it was specifically anything to do with Wexner, and a lot of other things. I mean, it was just so much because, I had read about her story in mainstream media because they reported on her, right? And honestly, she said everything that she had told me, she had told them, and less than 5% ended up in mainstream media.
Are you of the opinion that Wexner is an asset of either a foreign intelligence service or our intelligence service?
She said that he's Mossad. That's what she said.
Right. It does.
And that he's part of the mob, like the mafia.
Right.
She said it was like organized crime. And in my series I point that out too, that he has basically documented ties to the National Crime Syndicate, which is the Jewish and Italian mafia. They started their union in the 1920s, and they've pretty much been blackmailing ever since. And they got in bed with the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. And then after the CIA was made, they got in bed with them, and that's where all of this has really come from, right? So Wexner's a part of that, and he's been carrying this on. But every time she would bring him up, they would cut it out. They don't want to go after Wexner. But, if he's the head of this, it won't stop until there's some accountability for him. But apparently, because he's the richest man in Ohio, no one wants to say anything. And I think that's sick.
Absolutely. What did she say about Ghislaine Maxwell? What was her role in this? And where does she think she is now? Or...
Yo, give me some love.
Well, she said Ghislaine Maxwell is the most dangerous woman she thinks she's ever met and the most dangerous asset for Israel. That's a direct quote. She said that. And she said that Ghislaine Maxwell talked about Israel and said that she and Wexner and Epstein were not loyal to the United States. They were loyal to Israel. I mean, they straight up told her that. She had passports, Ghislaine did, for like 5 different countries, including Israel, the United States, the United Kingdom, France. This woman was balls deep in intelligence. And of course, anyone that looks at her father knows this. Ghislaine also told her that she believes her father was murdered by Israeli intelligence, but then given a state funeral because of his importance. Right, among other things. But she said Ghislaine is a dangerous, very dangerous woman, but didn't have a lot of friends. So the people she would treat as, her servants, her employees, she ended up trying to share information about herself. She'd have her go shopping with her, sit her down and go through photo albums of her childhood. She had 12 photo albums of her growing up with the royal family. That has not been mentioned in mainstream media. They claim the Prince Andrew ties were in the late 90s with Ghislaine Maxwell. She says no way. They were really young in these pictures, and there were photo album after photo album.
Wow.
Of them. Yeah.
When you say dangerous woman, is it farmers that Ghislaine could make people disappear? That she could, did Farmer suggest that there were certain girls or victims that she used to see around that she doesn't see around anymore? Was there anything of that nature discussed?
Well, on the last point, she didn't say Ghislaine. She didn't talk about Ghislaine murdering anyone per se, but she definitely does think that there were a lot of kids that ended up dying that got recruited. We can go into that later. But in terms of what Ghislaine Maxwell was doing, she said that she one day went to her art portfolio because she was recruited to work for Epstein. She was basically forced to work for Epstein because of the dean of the school, the art school she was going to in New York, basically said, "Oh, you're going to work for these guys," basically, and that's why she was there. So she had this art portfolio. Depends on how you define cool.
No, I said what school? School, not that's cool.
Oh, what school?
Yeah.
Sorry, it came through and I was like,
No, yeah.
No, it was the New York Academy of Art, and the woman that was the dean, the head of the school at the time was a woman named Eileen Guggenheim. And there's pictures of her with this lady, Marina Abramovich, pictures of her with the Clintons.
At this point in the podcast, I do want to say that myself, neither you are suicidal.
No, not at all.
Okay, just want to let everyone know that.
I intend to take these people to town.
Yeah.
Because the fact that mainstream media would not report this, and it's my job now.
Yeah.
The FBI knew all this stuff in 1996.
Jesus.
And most of mainstream media knew this in the early 2000s. Vicky Ward knew all this stuff.
So the Guggenheim owned school in Manhattan, or she's the principal, or somebody, tells Maria that you are now going to work for Jeffrey Epstein.
Basically, yeah.
And as what? As an assistant? As a masseuse? As a...
I mean, she ended up doing like interior decorating and stuff like that for all these apartments, because they had this whole apartment building that's officially owned by Epstein's brother, where like all these girls were kept. There were so many places. There were so many buildings. And they had offices. They didn't just have these apartments.
Yeah.
They had offices where Epstein worked. Ghislaine had offices. I mean, just tons of real estate.
How many women are we talking about, girls, at any given time?
Maria, this was in 1995 to 1996. She said that she saw between at least 5 different girls a day come in and out of Epstein's offices.
Okay, so he's running a global operation.
What up, dog?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
She,
Okay.
I have some audio clips from the call that we can get into.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah.
Now you've heard a lot
about this aspect.
You've heard a lot of mind blowing stuff, but you said this call you were on was one of the most mind blowing things you'd ever heard.
Yeah. I thought I knew this case. I reported on it like all last year. I thought I knew what had happened. I just can't believe that no one told these women's stories, that they like limited hangouted the crap out of it. I'm appalled. You know, I don't like mainstream media. That's why I do what I do, because they're not doing their job, you know, but I didn't really like hate them until this call.
Interesting. All right, let's get into the first clip here that is a clip from the call with you and Maria Farmer, Epstein victim.
Whitney, I've got to tell you something. This is why I've been dying to tell you. There are only 30 women that have come forward. 30. Whitney, I saw I'm not kidding, I'm very disturbed by this part. I saw at least 5 girls come in that house a day. I mean, on a really slow day, there would be 3 little girls. I know it was really high. You up in here, the actual amount. Oh, Whitney, it's in the thousands. Where are they? Where are they? Are they dead? I mean, these children have to be dead, because here's the thing, like Brad was like, well, what if they speak drug addict? What?
You think some of them were killed?
I think that they had to be, because here's the thing, Whitney. Brad said he knows of 500 just in Florida. Like, we can't find them. Where are they? And the thing is, like, oh, this kid's making that is loud machine out there. Come inside for a second, please. Anyway, all I was going to say is that these children were between, thousands. I was there a year, and I saw thousands of little girls, it was so exhausting, Whitney. They were in his office. There were just constantly little girls there, constantly. And I remember one of the reasons I quit, I said, I am tired of dealing with the number of people coming and going. You know, I'm just tired of, and that sounds horrible now, but I didn't understand what was happening entirely. I just knew it was weird. And I certainly didn't know it was pedophilia. I mean, and the other thing is, Ghislaine had said one day in Florida, when I was in Florida, she said, you know, we have to go on a jog for a while. And I said, why? And she said, well, Jeffrey needs 3 massages. So while I was in Florida, there were 3 little girls being assaulted. And now I look back on that, I'm so creeped out. You know, I didn't know. But I knew that they abused their maids from the Philippines. That was another reason I quit. Because one day I went to take a nap upstairs in the 66, or in the mansion on 71st. And, you know, I worked the door, like signing people in, and there was no one coming in that day. And so I went and took a nap. And they were the sweetest ladies from the Philippines ever. And they came in, and they were like, kind of tucking me in. And one of them whispered, I said, how long have you worked here? And she said, we were stolen. I'm like, what does that mean? They were stolen. They were trafficked. And they had women from the Philippines in Florida, and in New York, and in the house on the ranch. And no one ever cares. Like, I mentioned this, and everybody goes, yeah, well, they traffic people out of the Philippines and Thailand as servants.
Yeah, I mean, that is so incredibly disturbing to listen to The idea,
I know.
Yeah, the idea of that the mainstream media wouldn't report that there were so many more potential victims, and there's been very little effort on the part of the media to find these women. You know?
Yeah, well, those 500 victims in Florida, they have their names. They can't find them anywhere.
Really?
At all.
Who's got their names?
One of the victims' lawyers.
And they cannot.
They know there's these 500 victims in Florida they can't find.
And how did they get the names of those victims?
I think you'd have to ask them. I don't really know exactly how they, but I mean, you know, it's their job to investigate this stuff. They have all the victims that have come forward.
Yeah.
I mean, they apparently have names, and these girls are nowhere. And that's just 500. Like she was saying, this was in the 90s. This was like 5 a day, different girls.
Yeah, back then you could make people disappear relatively easily, especially if they were from a lower socioeconomic background. Some of them were foster kids. Some of them were, you know, fall through the cracks. And so easily nobody's looking for those girls. Nobody's trying to find them. It's insane. Now, Maria Farmer was a victim of Epstein. How? Was she sexually assaulted by him, or what was her role there? So she started out as an interior decorator. Then how does she get wrapped up in what else was going on?
Let me tell you, I'll try and summarize her story. And when you hear it, you will realize why the mainstream media will not tell her story, because it happened, the worst of it happened at Wexner's house.
Okay.
In New Albany, Ohio. Right. So obviously if they were to talk about it in any sort of detail, they'd have to talk about Wexner. Right.
Right.
So at some point where she was working for Epstein, she was basically told, oh, Abigail Wexner, that's Leslie Wexner's wife, wants an artist in residence. And she was basically, you know, told it would be great and she could go eat at this country club. Go play tennis there, and it was going to be all nice, and there was this big estate, and there were horses. I don't know. So she ends up going. She stays in his guest house. It has, just like all these other residences, all these cameras everywhere. They watch her every move. She has to call Abigail Wexner or someone to get, you know, permission to leave the house, to even go outside and like sit on the porch. You know, this country club she tried to go, and she was told that she wouldn't be served because she's not Jewish.
Interesting.
Which is weird. But apparently she said all these people, like Ghislaine, you know, all these people would just tell her they were like really supremacists. I don't know. So apparently she said that didn't surprise her based on everything else she experienced around these people. But at some point, you know, she was there for 3 months, and they really limited the amount of food they gave her. She felt like she was being starved, she said, which is disturbing. So she was basically trapped there, you know, you know, Epstein and Ghislaine came, I think, 3 to 4 times during her 3-month stay there. And on the last day, they tried to rape her. Both of them.
Both of them tried
Maxwell
to rape her.
and Epstein. Mm-hmm.
And what happened then?
Well, so when we talked, she jumped around a lot from different topics, from this to that. From what I understand, after that, you know, they ended up leaving. She called the police, and the police basically said they weren't going to come help her because they work for Wexner. They work at his gate, at the estate, and to like stop calling, basically.
And how old was she when this was happening?
She was an adult, but I don't know how. The thing is, she was an adult when this happened, but they took her sister. They kidnapped her sister, and she was like 15.
When did they kidnap her sister?
I'd have to look back at my notes, because it's a long story. I mean, 3.5 hours.
No,
right?
of course.
Just yesterday.
Yeah.
Right? But I mean, the mainstream media, the New York Times, basically makes the story sound like, oh, she went to Wexner's house to paint a mural, and Epstein hired her, and then Epstein tried to put his hands on her, and then she called the cops, and, you know, that was it.
Right.
No. And apparently at some point, this bodyguard for Wexner, who's former like special forces military guy, who's now Will Smith's bodyguard, he basically came over and was like, you know, you're never leaving here, and was like, basically like, I'm going to kill you. And the only reason she said she made it out is because there was a landline in that house, and she called literally everyone she had ever met in her entire life.
Wow.
Her entire, like her whole family, as many people as she could, saying they are trying to kill me.
Now,
and because they saw her making a stink with all these cameras, they ended up letting her go. And she said to me, I was an adult at the time. What if I had been one of those preteen girls or one of those younger kids? What would have happened to me?
Did she ever see any notable people, any bold-faced names with Epstein and Ghislaine that would be surprising to anybody?
Oh, yeah. One thing that shocked me, honestly, is that she said that in New York, Ghislaine would go to these around the time school would get out to like middle schools. She would like drive around and say that she was recruiting models for Victoria's Secret and would go up to like all these 12-year-old girls with like braces and stuff in school uniforms. But she almost always went to do this with Ivana Trump, Trump's ex-wife. And so they were together all the time in this, going around in cars, talking to these young girls, and that they would exchange information. And the next day, those girls would be in Epstein's office.
So she would go around to, I imagine, were these prep schools? Are these public? I mean,
I don't know exactly what type of school it was. But
it's hard to imagine that they're going to very wealthy schools, because then the parents of those kids would also be sort of powerful and connected people. But who knows? Who knows? But so she was going to junior high schools, middle schools with Ivana Trump, and saying she was recruiting girls for Victoria. Wait, what was she recruiting girls for?
Ghislaine told Maria, because Maria would come along in the car. They'd be like, "Come with us." Like Ghislaine would take her shopping and all this stuff. She'd be like, "Get in the car, let's go,"
Right.
And she would like stay in the car and like see these exchanges happen, But one thing she did tell me is that they asked the kids about their grades. They only wanted the kids with good grades. They wanted smart kids, and they wanted talented kids, like creative kids.
And she would say, I'm recruiting for a modeling agency, and she would do this with Ivana Trump. Yeah, I mean, it's satanic. It's horrible. It's evil. Ivana Trump, what's the angle there? I mean, does her name come up? Yeah.
I honestly don't know, because it had never come up before, but she was like, I want her to explain herself. Why was she always there? And why was she always going around with Ghislaine with these kids? Why was she involved? Like, she should explain herself. That's what Maria said.
Are there a lot of photos with Ghislaine and Ivana Trump? I haven't seen any, but that doesn't mean they don't exist.
I believe so.
Yeah,
but,
okay.
I mean, I'd have to go. There's pictures of Ghislaine and Trump from like the early 90s and all that stuff. So it really honestly wouldn't be this surprising. This was like mid 90s, right? This is like 95. By the time it hit like 2000 and so, like the Trump Epstein relationship sort of started to get rocky.
It started to degenerate. Why? Why exactly did it start to get rocky?
Well, from what I understand, it was sort of competition about real estate at some point. There was this mansion in Palm Beach that Epstein wanted to buy and flip, and then he showed it to Trump and asked his opinion, and then Trump ended up taking it from Epstein or something like that. Some sort of like real estate
marksmanship, gamesmanship.
Yeah, I don't know. And so they got mad at each other, and apparently after Trump did that to Epstein tried to like set him up or something with some sort of like blackmail thing.
So Maria, when did Maria start figuring out that, hey, this is not a modeling agency. These aren't talent scouts. These people are pedophiles. Did she figure it out before was it the rape in Ohio that did it, the attempted rape, or she had no?
Yeah, that's what she said.
Yes. Okay.
She said during the attempted rape, she said everything like that started to click, all this weird stuff she'd seen and just like didn't understand, just thought they were like just weird, total weirdos. When she was being assaulted, it just clicked. She's like, these people have been around my sister, who's way younger than her. Right. These people have been around my sister. And then she said that she, out of nowhere, had this feeling that they'd taken these pictures she had of her sisters that were like hidden in like the basement of this guest house. She like had all her stuff there like super organized. And because she was an artist, she had like some pictures of like her younger sisters like half naked for like anatomy stuff, but she always painted them with their clothes on. And apparently they had gone in there and taken the pictures. And after she escaped that mess, barely, she called Epstein's office trying to get those pictures back. And eventually someone called her back and said, don't try and get the pictures back. They're in his briefcase and he's using them. And then she hung up.
How long did you work for him in total?
It was 1995 to 1996, when that, when she was assaulted. I don't know exactly what month she began. I had to do a follow-up call with her. It was just taking it all in at once, I mean,
yeah.
I was just like, tell me whatever you want to tell me,
Yeah.
I was like, I have all afternoon. Let's go.
What else? Did she
so
say
I'm gonna have to do
anything?
follow-up stuff. Mhm.
What else do you remember in terms of disturbing or, things that you had not necessarily heard before?
Well, there's a clip for this one.
Yeah.
She said the FBI was just as abusive to her as Epstein and Maxwell,
Right.
which is just insane, since that's supposed to be the institution that protects people like this.
Yeah, nobody listening to this show believes that, I'll tell you that much. I'm sure there are people out there that believe that. Nobody listening to this show. Let's play that clip, because that's an interesting clip to get into. Did they, after she left, was that the end of contact she had with them after the assault and they finally let her out? Did she have any further contact with them?
Yeah.
Okay.
She said that when she went back to New York after that whole incident in Ohio, that Epstein stalked her and followed her around.
Very creepy. All right, we're going to play the clip now. Here's the FBI clip.
I mean, I can't even explain to you how abusive the FBI is. It's unbelievable to me. I mean, they, first of all, never offered me witness protection. And when I first called them, they knew I was telling. Believe me, they knew they knew everything I was telling them. They already knew, because they're in on it. And it was so weird, his reaction when I was talking to him. I called and I got some answer guy, and then he passes me to some guy who's like, when I start talking about Wexner, and I asked the guy, do you have, this is all over the phone in 1996. I said, do you have a file on Les Wexner? And he said, why? And I said, he's the head of the snake in America. And I don't even know I was intuiting this. And also, I think it's common sense when you see all this stuff going on.
Like a man who dressed like
and anyway, when I said that to him,
stop tripping.
He said, yeah, I don't know, maybe we do. And I said, well, these people are using child pornography, and they've stolen photographs of my sisters. That right there would have been life in prison for Jeffrey and Ghislaine. I still have the envelopes with their touch DNA and fingerprints on them, and the FBI will not take them from me. They never would. They would never take the envelopes that they stole. I mean, they photographs out of these envelopes, and I have proof. I still have the envelopes, Whitney. And the FBI was like, yeah, no, we don't need that. They also knew in 1996 that I'd been trafficked and Annie had been trafficked, and that would have been enough to put them away. But they never cared. They didn't care. And the worst part was I named everybody. I named Donald Trump. I named everyone who I thought was a co-conspirator at the time. So I named Alan Dershowitz, Donald Trump, absolutely the Clintons. These are people that I saw coming and going, that I knew were part of it. And I made it really clear that this is a very scary thing for children, and that I see between 5 and 10 girls a day going upstairs. And now that I know what's happening to them, I want it stopped. And
that's where it's supposed to go.
Yeah. I mean, this is just mind-blowing stuff. When she says that she tells the FBI that, she has information on people that are trafficking children and they do nothing. And we've heard this before. We heard it with the Franklin scandal. There's been many other pedophile rings in the UK, the Kincora Boys Home in the UK, North Fox Island, another much smaller, but also wealthy, powerful people abusing children. The Franklin scandal is the big, from the 80s and 90s, is the huge precursor to Epstein, where you had a very politically connected figure doing the same exact thing. What is your belief when you zoom out for a minute and you look at this from 30,000 feet? And what does this say about our society? What does it say about the ruling class? What does it say about elites? What does it say about how people are controlled? What does it say to you after looking at all this stuff? What can you extract from this and apply it to kind of an overarching thesis of what's going on that we don't really know about?
Oh, wow. Okay, so this is definitely global in scale, number one. I think a lot of these elites aren't loyal to the nations they live in. They're loyal to their ruling class. Like, this is a supranational, like, swamp, basically. You know how people in the U.S. are calling, like, you know, the deep state, the swamp. I mean, I feel like, you know, there's a lot of billionaires that have this sort of supranational structure, and they're just like in it to do this sick stuff. Because Leslie Wexner is not the only billionaire that's into this.
Right.
I can say that for a fact.
When we hear people talk about the occult and that a lot of these people are just into strange, weird, ancient religions and weird types of ceremonies and things like that, how much does that figure into some of the things that you've looked at, whether it's Marina Abramovich or what? Because I dismiss a lot of that stuff because I say it's bad enough if they're pedophiles. I don't really care if they're satanic or Mormon. It doesn't really matter that much to me. But how much credence do you put in this stuff where you do see a lot of occult imagery and a lot of occult types of ceremonies in these, you know, whether it's secret societies or fraternity? I mean, what amount of weight do you give that stuff?
Well, you know, I think throughout the time, like several decades, have there been a lot of people looking at this stuff. I think intelligence agencies have had people out there to do what they call muddy the waters, you know, try and discredit legitimate research into these type of crimes by putting out stuff that's just like, you know, nuts. But in terms of like the, you know, the Satanist stuff and all of that. Actually, I didn't take any clips out from this, but Maria did say that she saw weird symbols at like Epstein's places and Ghislaine's apartment and stuff that she saw somewhere else laterward, and someone told her that like that was Baphomet, you know, like a Satanist thing. Like she said she saw that, but wasn't like overly familiar with that type of stuff.
It was tasteful. It wasn't overdone. The Baphomet, the satanic statues were too tasteful. It wasn't overdone. It was a little Baphomet there, a little What when people talk about the Clintons and Trump, you know, we're talking about the most, you know, powerful people. But see, they're not the most powerful people in the world, but they're certainly, you know, they occupy some of the most powerful positions in the world. What is your opinion of the role that either one of those men had in this after looking at a lot of the information that you've looked at?
Well, honestly, I think since the days of John F. Kennedy, the president doesn't really have as much power as we'd like to think he does. Right. I think part of the reason for that is to make people think that elections like actually make a difference, at least presidential elections. And that as long and have people, you know, sort of develop this political savior complex. As long as we have the right guy in the White House, you know, then as long as, you know, we can fix things if we get this one guy in this one office. And I think since the days of JFK, that type of stuff is not really reasonable anymore, because what we're dealing with is, you know, these intelligence agencies that do these things, like, you know, support Epstein in that type of activity, for example, but they're also involved in drug running. They're also involved in gun running. I mean, they're essentially organized crime syndicates. And like I said earlier, they got in bed, the CIA, right, as soon as it was formed, basically got in bed with the mob. And they're in bed with the mob in a bunch of other countries. They work closely with other intelligence agencies like Mossad and MI5 in the UK that do the same thing. So, I mean, that's basically who rules the world. But they answer to people too, right? And that's actually there's this one clip that I have to conclude, I guess, that where Ghislaine's talking about that a little bit, because she says that even though Ghislaine and Wexner were working for Israel, right? So she said Wexner was the head of the stake in America, but there's another family that she thinks is like the head of the snake.
Okay,
right?
And where does she think Ghislaine Maxwell is currently?
That's we'll get into that. So let's play the clip. And,
all right, let's play the clip.
Unpack from there.
Let's play the clip.
Tripping. You heard me.
All right, here, Maria Farmer, Epstein victim, is talking about Ghislaine Maxwell.
So then she says to me, you know, my dad was a very powerful man, and, you know, he was very important. She said, Maria, you don't understand. And then she's showing me, like, who she grew up with and how powerful he was and how much money they had. And then she goes on to tell me, she said, you know, Maria, and this is true, she said, and she showed me, she had passports. Get this. I don't know how this is legal. She had a passport, a French passport, an English passport, an Israeli passport, an American passport, and there was one other. I'm trying to think of what the other one was. And I was like, I thought you were only allowed to be citizen like of 2 countries or something. I didn't know. And she's like, oh, no, because of my dad. I'm a citizen of all these nations. And I'm like, what? So then later, when she was talking to me about something one day, she said that the Rothschilds were the greatest protectors of her family. And she wasn't talking about Lynn Forrester, by the way.
She was talking about the other ones.
The people that are in her.
Okay, so the Rothschilds, who are the Rothschilds? Because that's like, they're the centerpiece of every conspiracy since the beginning of time, pretty much. Who are they? I mean, I kind of, as soon as I hear the Rothschilds, I usually roll my eyes and go, oh boy, here we go. Then people are going to start talking about numerology soon. And, you know, like they're going to get into like, so who are the Rothschilds? I mean, who are the Rothschilds? Other than a very,
They're a multi-generational banking family. I mean, I don't want to like talk about all the different things people have said about them over the years, but there are some obvious facts people can point to. A multi-generational banking family in several countries in Europe. You know, a lot of very influential people that later go into positions of major political power. Sometimes they're Rothschild bankers. Like Macron of France used to work for a Rothschild bank. Commerce Secretary of the United States, Wilbur Ross, also used to work for them, right? But it's also worth pointing out, since, you know, it's pretty much documented now that these guys were working with Israeli intelligence, that the influence of the Rothschilds in the creation of Israel, I mean, this is historical fact, the Balfour Declaration that really paved the way for the creation of Israel as a political state, was addressed to the Rothschild family. I mean, they were the people that really pushed, funded and nurtured the Zionist movement in its early days in the 19th century. And I mean, you can see that reflected in Israel today. One of the biggest roads in Tel Aviv is named after a Rothschild. The Knesset building, which is like Israel's Congress, I mean, that was financed by the Rothschild family. They have a definite influence there, I would argue. And I think a lot of other people, I mean, it's hard to see that type of money floating around and patronage to a certain nation state and assume they don't have influence there.
And
right.
And Ghislaine's father was an Israeli intelligence asset, and a media mogul, right? He published papers.
In the UK.
In the UK,
yeah.
right, right, okay. So he was, you know, probably the propaganda arm of...
Well, he worked for several different intelligence agencies.
Okay.
Robert Maxwell did. Like, he had a relationship with Russian intelligence as well. But he... apparently, British intelligence thought about recruiting him at some point, and they said no because he's only loyal to Israel. So he was considered to be like, you know, an Israeli super spy, basically. But he had like a lot of connections to different intelligence agencies in the world. But apparently, he had been given money to build his media empire by Mossad financiers or financiers, and had basically been, put in this position to manage this money, and he didn't, wasn't able to pay Mossad back at some point, and started making threats, and he got pushed off a boat.
When Epstein gets caught the second time, is this just a major glitch in the matrix? Did nobody see this coming? How does, he's got all these powerful friends. He gets away with it the first time. What is the second time then? How do we understand that? Is it that just, you had an aggressive district attorney in New York, or how exactly, or an aggressive U.S. attorney? How exactly does he get brought in the second time?
So Maria said that it had to do with some very tenacious NYPD detectives that were very adamant about getting this guy charged again. She said the Berman guy, Jeffrey Berman, the district attorney, is not a good guy. That's what she said. So she said that he basically had to act because these guys at NYPD were like really persistent, and that she knew that he was going to be arrested like 2 weeks before because they had come to interview her and like solidify up the case and all this stuff.
And these NYPD guys, how does the case even fall into their lap?
I don't know the details of that, to be honest. Personally, before I talked to her, I thought this had to do with Deutsche Bank, because just 2 weeks before he was arrested, Deutsche Bank, which was the only bank that would still really do business publicly anyway with Epstein, closed their accounts.
Do you think there's anything true about the idea that Anthony Weiner's laptop had information on it? Is this something that you've heard this idea, have you not? I'm asking you.
Any evidence for that?
Okay, but NYPD guys certainly pushed for Epstein to be, I guess,
That's what Maria said. She said they came to her, in June of last year and were building a case, and that it was them, not the Berman guy. And she said some of the stuff that Berman said during the press conference she found really offensive. But I'd have to go back in the call and find out exactly what she said about it. She named the detective at NYPD that was she said was awesome, but I can't recall his name right now.
Has she? So she after the assault, Epstein is then stalking her. What does that mean?
Following her around. Apparently, they really didn't like it when someone left. And she had tried to quit numerous times before, and it was always like, no, you can go here, you can go there. They would try and pass her off to friends or whatever, and eventually that's how she ended up at Wexner's place.
Yeah, and I guess it's intimidating when you have all these powerful, rich people around you and you're working for them. You don't want to make enemies. You try to stick it out. Obviously once you're assaulted, then you're like, okay, it's time to go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she didn't realize, like I said, a lot of the things that she had seen over the years that she had just thought was weird and dismissed. It just all during the assault, she said it all just sort of started to click and come together. And she was like, oh, that's what these people really are.
What about the Dubin family? Have you read at all about the Dubin family? Vanity Fair did an article about them.
Glenn Dubin and his wife was Epstein's girlfriend. Yes. And then the daughter was he wanted to marry the daughter. Yeah. Apparently, this is kind of common with these families that are tied to this.
Did you hear did you see the thing about Bloomberg goes, wherever I am in the world, I get my daughter a date? Do you see that?
Oh, yeah, about China. I set her up with dates with all these oligarchs in China.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess they look at their kids this way. It's sad.
I mean,
these people are messed up in the head. They obviously don't have normal, happy family lives.
Well, neither did I, but I'm not fucking kidnapping kids outside of schools, You can overeat. You can do drugs. That's how I've dealt with it. This episode of the Tim Dillon Show is brought to you by Blue Chew. Guys, remember the days when you were always ready to go, when you had a big, hard dick? Now you can increase your performance and get that extra confidence in bed. Listen up! BlueChew.com. That's blue like the color blue, dummy. What, did you lose oxygen to the brain at birth? Are you a dum-dum? Are you an aggressive beast of a person that can't really read, can't organize your thoughts? You just sit there panting and sweating, trying to remember what the laws are. You can't just grab people and bite them. That's who this is for. That's why we got to tell you the color is BLUE. Blue Chew, not Blue's Clues. Blue Chew. Brings you the first chewable with the same FDA-approved ingredients as Viagra and Cialis. I don't think we're allowed to say that, Ben.
This that bomb.
Okay, great. No, leave it in. People like the authenticity. Take them. Get a big dick. Full stomach, empty stomach. They're chewable. They work up to twice as fast as a pill, so you can be ready whenever an opportunity arises. And you know when an opportunity arises, whenever you say it does. I'm kidding. That's not real. Make sure you have consent. You ask the person if they would like to see your penis. Do you want to see my beanie? Blue Chew is prescribed online by licensed physicians. Nelson from The Simpsons laughed. I wish I could do that better, but Blue Chew is prescribed online by licensed physicians. What is it? So you don't have to go to the doctor's office or wait in line at the pharmacy. It ships right to your door or your mother's door in a discreet package. They're made in the USA. We're making dick pills, not N1, not masks. N95 mask or whatever the hell. We don't make them. We don't make any antibiotics. But if you need a hard cock, we make it right here in the USA. We don't farm that out, baby. The Chi-Coms aren't doing that. That's us. We can get your dick woke up. So that's BLUEchew.com. BLUECHEW.com. Promo code TIM. Try it free. What? So now, what exactly does, where is Ghislaine now? What's she up to? What, is she going to come out and reveal herself publicly? She's suing Epstein's estate because she wants her money or something. There is a lawsuit.
I think that's about getting the money back for the intelligence agency that funded this whole thing back to where it came from.
Right.
Because why else would she be suing? Because, I mean, her money didn't come, it was all given to her.
Do you think
just like all of Epstein's money was given to him, he didn't make like billions. He was given all this money by Wexner.
Do you think we'll see Ghislaine Maxwell again ever publicly?
I don't know, but Maria Farmer says that she is not hiding in Israel, that she's living in the Rothschild mansion.
Where's that? Where's the Rothschild
in
mansion?
the UK? Apparently they have several. But that she's with the UK Rothschilds. The head of that family, by the way, Lord Jacob Rothschild, since we mentioned her earlier, Marina Abramovich, they have recently this picture of them together and behind this painting that's called like Satan Summons His Legions. They're like posing in this together, right? I mean, it's weird.
Something's weird. Something's up. Why? I was looking, and again, I was always a skeptic of Pizzagate only because there were no victims, right? You know, Franklin, victims. Kincora, victims come forward. North Fox Island, victims come forward. Jeffrey Epstein, victims come forward. In anything without victims where we're just looking at art or we're just looking... But if you look at some of the art that Tony Podesta had and some of the artists and some of the artists that he would frequently purchase art from, it's fucking weird. There's kids in cages. They're doing sacrifices. It's very odd. I don't know, man. I've never seen, and I've been to some wealthy people's homes. I've really never seen art like that.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of people like Wexner and like Epstein, before this started to come out, I mean, their public persona, I mean, Bill Clinton in the early 2000s called Epstein a philanthropist, right? I mean, they had like these rosy reputations, like, look at how much Wexner's given to Ohio State University and the medical school is named after him, and he gave all this money to a hospital, look at him giving all his money away. And people say the same stuff about people like Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Bill Gates, after the Epstein arrest, kept hanging out with Epstein. He knew Epstein apparently in the 90s. They did business together. I don't know what that business was, but Gates flew on his plane like 3 times. He went to the island.
Now,
he did all this stuff. That's apparently fine.
Epstein had all these different scientists around him. He said his interest was eugenics. In what form, what are they trying to do? If you had to wrap your head around why he's having these salons with all these scientists and he's having these, meetings with all these important people in the field of science, what is the goal? What do you think the end goal, if you had to speculate, and I know you don't love doing that because you're a great reporter, but if you had to speculate, what do you think he wants? Does he want to influence health policy so that it kind of promotes some of these more nefarious ideas that he has? And does he want to wrap eugenics up in like a nice bow and say, here, it's not eugenics, it's whatever he would call it. It's better life. We call it better life,
Right.
Less
so
life.
I don't know exactly what Bill Gates wants, but I do know what Jeffrey Epstein was interested in terms of his eugenics interest. And this has been reported in mainstream media. But if that's the case with like what they did to Maria Farmer and they only reported 5%, I mean, honestly, who knows? But what they did say is that he was basically interested in essentially making like a master race, and that they were looking for girls that were intelligent and they were asking about grades. They only wanted smart kids, creative kids, talented kids. And actually, Maria Farmer's younger sister was one of these girls that was being groomed to have Epstein's children. And then after the assault, she got, Ghislaine called her and said, you ruined everything. Like your sister was going to have Epstein's baby. She was so lucky and all this stuff. Like they really think their genetics are superior. As far as what Bill Gates might be up to, I don't want to speculate because I don't know what he says in private, so I can't assume, but I would really urge people to look at the history of eugenics in the United States, because in the 1920s, the eugenics movement was so powerful that the Supreme Court ruled that a mother and her young daughter had to be sterilized because they were too stupid.
Really?
And they were from like a poor, And this is not isolated. There were states that had passed eugenic laws before this. I mean, they're the billionaires of the Gilded Age were really into this. And they were like, and the lady that they said to sterilize in that Supreme Court ruling was a poor white person. They were just like, oh, you're too stupid because you're from, the Appalachian Mountains, but they've been like that with other, it's not just white people,
Of course. No, of course not.
Obviously.
Of course not, yeah.
But that type of mentality actually ended up inspiring Hitler But obviously, with World War II, that type of mentality went out of style. And there's a lot of people who make the convincing argument that those people that were eugenicists in the United States during that period of time maintained their views, but found a way to sort of let it slide under the public. Right. And
what about a lot
I don't
of
want to
people?
get too controversial, but Margaret Sanger.
Go there.
Okay. Well, Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of like Planned Parenthood,
right,
a long time ago, she wrote very disturbing things about African Americans,
right,
and intentionally wanted to put Planned Parenthood centers there, where there was the highest concentration of African Americans.
Yeah,
okay?
I mean, it's a
and that's not a conspiracy. You can read her letters.
No,
it's odd, you know. I don't want to get into the whole like issue because it's like such a left and right divide, and I really try and do everything I can to like transcend the left right divide because there's so much more important stuff.
And you mean the issue meaning abortion?
Bickering. Right, but I mean, if this lady was saying this stuff and saying, "I want to put the center here because I don't want this particular race to like, I don't want their, you know, I don't want them to have a lot of kids," you know?
Yeah,
that's messed up. And Bill Gates' father was associated with that organization. Apparently he had ties to the Rockefellers, and the Rockefeller family were from the time of the first billionaire J.D. Rockefeller in the Gilded Age, where they were passing all these laws. He was into that stuff, and his sons were into that stuff. Right. So I would say to people that want to sort of look at this, look at the history, because we know what those people were saying and what they were doing, because they were open about it then.
Right. And now they've
and ask yourself, did this continue? They were never held accountable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very possible. And if you look at stuff Bill Gates has said, like, you know, a couple of years ago, too many Africans.
Right. So now those views have maybe gone underground, but they're still very much, you know, held by people. And what do you think it is? You know, you study these people, you've written about them. Is it power? Is it control? Do they want to just control the entire world? What's the goal here? What's the end game? Is to just have a slave race of people that will do the jobs, and then have this, you know, kind of perfected race of people that gets to enjoy the benefits of, I mean, what do you think the picture looks like?
Well, really quick, I want to go back to my last point really quick, because, you know, like you saying this had gone like underground. I really believe that, because something that Maria told me is that she heard Ghislaine and all of these people she was around say the most racist things. And I mentioned earlier that they were very supremacist, but they would not go to cities where they thought there were too many African Americans. They said the most racist
First of all,
things
I want
about these people.
Yeah, I want my human traffickers to be woke and politically correct. I do. I don't sleep at night if my human traffickers are not for diversity and inclusion. But so Ghislaine Maxwell, I mean, it's just fascinating to me, man, when you look at all this stuff, how evil these people are, how powerful they are, how big the system is, how utterly impossible it seems to get any justice. Nobody seems to be able to, even when it looks like, now who whacked Epstein in your estimation? Mossad hit? What is it?
You know, I honestly don't know, because, you know, a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about his death and like what happened to him. I think that attention is better spent asking, how the heck are we going to get Ghislaine Maxwell in prison, and how are we going to get Leslie Wexner in prison?
Well,
and hold them accountable.
We're probably not. Yeah, I wish we would.
I don't really know who killed Epstein. There's no camera footage, so honestly, anything could have happened. Honestly, I mean, who really knows? I mean, the prison guards won't talk; they're being charged. I mean, they won't say anything, right? They were apparently like asleep or whatever, you know? And the camera footage was there, and then it disappeared, and who knows? So, you know, I don't really know what happened, honestly. But there's a lot of people that definitely wanted him dead. I think that's pretty clear. And he was middle management. He probably wasn't worth saving. If they killed Robert Maxwell,
they're going to kill Jeffrey.
They'd probably kill him too. He outlived his usefulness. You know what I mean?
Coronavirus, man-made, natural. What do you think?
Well, I have no idea what it is, and I think everyone that's saying they know what it is, I don't think they're telling the truth, because it's really hard to know. There's so much information out there. It's hard. But what I do think is inaccurate and we're seeing this huge, very similar to the weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, let's go to war with China tomorrow. Yeah, let's go to war with China tomorrow. Yeah.
You up in here?
But what's disturbing is that a lot of the evidence these people are citing, saying it's a Chinese bioweapon, for example, they cite studies, and if you actually look at those studies and you look at the funding, it was funded by not just the Chinese government, but a lot of U.S. government organizations, and that lab in Wuhan had direct ties to Fort Detrick.
Right, in Maryland.
And these other U.S. research organizations. Even these people that are claiming that it's an exclusive Chinese bioweapon, they shared all these articles today saying Facebook's fact checker worked at the Wuhan lab. It's an American.
Right.
And they're acting like people aren't going to get it, I mean, so obviously there's why would they leave that out,
What do you think?
Do
you think these shutdowns continue? Do you think we ever get our rights back? Do you think that they're going to keep finding ways to take more and more rights under the guise of
so.
now public health?
They will be.
It was terrorism for many years. Now it'll be public health.
Yeah, well, it's another invisible enemy, isn't it? I mean, there were the terrorists. And after 9/11, and now, we're allied. The U.S. government is allied with Al Qaeda in Syria and Yemen, basically, fighting on their behalf.
That's amazing.
And we gave up all these rights for that, and now we're openly supporting them. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
But in terms of coronavirus, some of the reporting I've done in recent weeks has really shown that a lot of the solutions for coronavirus that we're being told we need to, these systems, like these surveillance systems we have to implement, these were planned out last year, months ago.
Yeah.
For example, this coronavirus surveillance system, they were promoting this under a different name called Safe Home, under this agency they wanted to make called HARPA. It was Ivanka Trump promoting that. Now Jared Kushner is promoting this thing today in his new task force or whatever. But last year they were saying it needed to be done to stop mass shootings.
And what is
what
this?
they are doing is they are taking these solutions that they want to implement, and they're just tacking on whatever Americans are most afraid of.
What is this
It was
surveillance?
mass shootings.
Yeah.
Now it's coronavirus.
What is this surveillance system, though? What are they trying to do? What are they going to try to do?
I ain't no cluck ass.
Well, they're basically trying to get Americans' private medical records in a giant database mixed with everything that's on your consumer smartphone, and use it to make sure you're not social distancing and all this stuff. But it's definitely more than that, and I'll tell you why. Because last October, Bill Barr, the Attorney General, created a pre-crime program that started this year. It's called DEEP, the Disruption and Early Engagement Program. He created it last year, saying that this was supposed to be to stop mass shootings. And it's pre-crime. Because the idea behind it is that you arrest someone who's mobilizing towards violence, and the way you do it is by looking at their health records and what they say on social media, and that you arrest them before they can strike. Right, that's pre-crime, and that is a slippery slope. And after coronavirus and all these lockdowns happens, Bill Barr's Department of Justice asked for the right to indefinitely detain Americans without trial. He hasn't gotten them yet, but he might. And to think that this whole surveillance dragnet they're not going to be pushing through, it's crazy. I have another report coming out next week about this little-known U.S. government body called the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. It's chaired by Eric Schmidt, formerly the head of Alphabet, Google's parent company, and is full of all these CIA guys, Pentagon guys. And basically what they say in this document that just came out last year that no one's reporting on, which is insane, they basically say in order for the U.S. as for national security purposes, we have to maintain a technological advantage over China in artificial intelligence. And the way to do that is to remake American society so that we adopt a Chinese-style surveillance state, but worse than what China has.
Wow.
That's basically what they say.
And
this is scandalous.
Where is this coming out of again?
I'll send it to you. It came out as a Freedom of Information Act request. Just a couple days ago. No one's covered it, and it is just the most scandalous document. And it's insane.
And they're saying,
and it totally is the opposite of the rhetoric we are hearing about. The social credit score and China's abusing human rights. They are literally saying we have to do that here, or we will not be able to set international norms and not be able to control the market of the fourth industrial revolution that AI is going to create and all this stuff. And they're basically saying we have to eliminate individual car ownership. We have to eliminate cash and credit cards. You can't even see, they call all of these things legacy systems. You know, that's basically the American way of life. No more in-person shopping. You have to do it all online.
This is so fucking nuts, because this is
nuts.
What I was talking about and these are people that are saying in order to beat China, we have to become China.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. They're saying China is going to leapfrog us and go miles ahead in adoption of these technologies unless we do what they're doing and we do it faster. And we have to leapfrog them, basically.
And
they're basically using this pandemic to do that, to remake society. They're doing this controlled demolition of the economy, and they're not going to reopen it up until they remake everything, I think.
Wow.
Based on the stuff that they've been saying.
This is very disturbing. So they want to get rid of a lot of these legacy systems.
That's what they call it.
Yeah.
Like going to a store in person and buying stuff, legacy system.
Wow.
Yeah. Owning your own car, legacy system.
Wow.
Using cash or a credit card, legacy system.
So now what are you going to use?
They want it to be all smartphone-based payments like they do in India now, because India, like a year or two ago, like eliminated almost all currency in circulation and no one there has credit cards. So they all had to adopt this like mobile wallet, like digital wallet, which is really similar to the stuff they put out in that coronavirus relief bill, the digital dollar and all this stuff that they were like sort of putting in there.
Yeah, what was in that relief bill? What was in that bill? What are they doing? What are they building in there? What are they doing in that bill?
Well, I haven't read it all. It's apparently like several thousand pages.
Yeah.
But considering at the time they passed it, after the crisis was like, exploding, they had that prepared well in advance.
Right.
Those type of bills, just like the Patriot Act, they don't write them like in a couple days and say, here, sign. I mean, right on 9/11, the Patriot Act was ready to go. And I think this bill is the same. And like I said, all these people last year were like making these plans, and they were simulating pandemics too. Crimson Contagion, that was a 19 federal agency, 12 states, a bunch of private companies gaming out a pandemic in the U.S. 4 times last year from January to August. And they had one day on the last exercise or the last simulation, which was like lasted 4 days. The entire third day was the Secretary of the Treasury and Finance. And I think that's where that bill came from.
So they want everything like China on your smartphone. They want everything, they want everything basically.
Yeah, they don't even want people to have laptops. They want it all on the phone.
Why?
Everything on the phone.
Why not laptops? Are they harder to trace or nobody knows?
I guess they just want everyone's life on the phone. That's pretty much where it's going. They're like, phase all this stuff out and make it all the phone.
All the phone.
It's crazy. I will send you this. So you see I'm not making this up.
I don't believe you're making it up.
All the stuff like mass surveillance is awesome. It's a killer way to train artificial intelligence. They say it's awesome that in China, people are using, the police use voice recognition technology to arrest people before they commit crimes.
Yeah. Oh boy. Before they commit crimes.
And this commission is supposed to give the recommendations to the government about how, from this national security point of view, how to maintain an advantage over China. And this is what they're saying. And someone had to do this Freedom of Information Act request to get it. And this is like the only document produced by that body they got. And like I said, this is headed by the ex-Google guy, Eric Schmidt. But it has like 2 different, like the first CEO of In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital arm, right?
Yeah.
It has the current CEO of In-Q-Tel. It has the former deputy director of national intelligence. I mean, it's spooks, and it's Amazon, it's Microsoft, Google, it's Oracle. Oracle, by the way, is involved in the coronavirus response right now and like reopening the economy with Trump. I mean, all of these same players that are on this commission are also involved in this reopening the economy business. And what do you think they're going to do? Probably what they were saying in private last year. You know what I mean?
So this is really terrifying. This is like ending freedom, what little freedoms we have left, getting rid of them. Now, why no private ownership of vehicles? What is behind that? Is that the climate related? They just don't want.
No. They want autonomous self-driving fleets of like ride-sharing cars. They say that like things like Uber and all this stuff, that's where this has to go. That individual car ownership is like dangerous, and that it needs to be fleet ownership. It's more efficient. and all this stuff. I mean, that's basically what
about
they lay
owning
out.
a
And they say, if we don't do it, then China will be better at it than us. And then they'll export it to other countries, and our giant Silicon Valley tech companies will lose money and all this stuff. I mean, that's how they're thinking
If
about
we don't put a chip in your arm, China's going to put chips in everybody's arm, and they're going to make the money.
Exactly the mentality. And it's,
Yeah. What about home ownership? Is there anything in the document about that?
They didn't talk about home ownership, no. Not specifically. It's redacted. They didn't include all the slides.
So there's a lot in that. There's a lot in that document that they left out.
I'm sure.
They redacted
and there's obviously more documents. They've had tons of meetings and briefings and all this stuff, and this is the only thing they've put out.
Yeah, one little document trickled out. And these are all the guy from Google. So and this is what I was talking to Joe about. And this is what I was saying. A lot of these people have pretty fucking scary ideas that are hidden from public view. And by the time you know what they are, they've already been foisted on you. And you know, you can't get away from them. Wow.
Well, that's why it's important to bring this out. I will send this over. I mean, hopefully you won't share it before my report's up. So
No. We'll wait. You do your thing. People, this will come out Sunday in 2 days, and then people will listen to us talk about it. Everybody will read your article. I mean, all of this is mind blowing. All of it is crazy.
But I really feel like they're using the lockdown to do a bunch of stuff they normally couldn't get away with. And I think that's why this ruling about Epstein and the sweetheart deal happened now too. Right. Ghislaine Maxwell, Wexner-Off, what are people going to do? And then the corporate relief, the relief bill or whatever was a 4 times bigger bailout for Wall Street than 2008. And after the 2008 bailouts, there was Occupy Wall Street. There were protests, but everyone's on lockdown. What are they going to do?
Right. The Yellow Vest protests in France.
$1,200 check.
The Yellow Vests in France are done.
Off of for 10 weeks.
Yeah.
That happened in France.
Yeah, that's done.
All done.
The Hong Kong protests are done. Right.
It happened in a lot of the first countries to do lockdowns actually all had protest movements going on. It's so France had the Yellow Vests. Spain had the separatists in Catalonia. Chile, where I live, had a lot of protests that began last October that were trying to get the current president of Chile to resign. Those went away. And the president of Chile, Sebastián Piñera, he declared a constitution, suspended the constitution for 90 days and declared a lockdown before there was a single death in Chile. He was like, bam, let's go.
Did they give a time frame with any of these things that they want to do in that document that trickled out, or we don't know?
It doesn't give a time frame, but considering that, they're like, we got to act now or China will, take it over. It just really shows that all this rhetoric about China bad, America good, that's not what they really think. What they really think is we like the Chinese model, but it needs to be us doing it. And we need to be the people exporting it. And then we'll be the global hegemony forever.
Yeah.
But if we don't do it, then it'll be China.
And people are going to be led into the slaughterhouse because we've created this fake us versus China. And we're going to become China, supposedly in order to beat China. Great.
Yeah.
Well, not great, but you know what it is.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's just the most illogical thing ever. And that's why I think it's so important, because then people will see the lie in the rhetoric, of people saying, oh, China's a huge threat to human rights and they're hostile and they're going to expand. Well,
which I'm sure they are. I'm sure they're not doing anything great over in China in terms of human rights.
Oh, no.
But
I'm not rooting for them. I'm just saying the U.S. is being super hypocritical publicly.
Yeah.
They're doing what Clinton said. I have a public and a private position. I mean, all of these people.
Yeah, it's very true. Very disturbing stuff, Whitney Webb. As always, we're up at night now. We were up before, but now we're up more. Tell people where they can support you financially, any which way. You are so essential. You're the only person really doing this kind of work. Where can people read your stuff? Where can they find you? How can they give you money?
Well, I set up a Patreon in January to help finance my Epstein book, because it's a small publisher that was really gracious. It was, they also published the book on the Franklin scandal by Nick Bryant. So it's a good fit. But unfortunately, because they're small, they really couldn't give me much in terms of an advance. So a lot of stuff like research help, and things like that, or access to some online sources and databases and stuff. I have to pay all of that out of pocket. So if you'd like to support that, you can support me on Patreon. I also have some exclusive.
So tell them what your
Patreon exclusive.
Yeah, tell them what your Patreon is. Where can they go?
You just have to search for Whitney Webb, but I think it's Whitney Webb NPN for when I used to work at Mint Press News.
We'll put it in the description of the YouTube and on the podcast. Yeah, we'll get them there. Yeah.
And you can follow me on Twitter _Whitney Webb. I'm also on Mastodon and Gab as well, because I'm probably going to get kicked off of Twitter at some point.
Do you think so?
I think the deplatforming is coming. Yeah. Actually, I think it was October, September. All these social media companies met with intelligence in the U.S. and they were like, "You guys have to protect public discourse ahead of the 2020 election." And they were like, "Yeah, we'll basically deplatform you before next November." So I think it's probably coming. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that'll be the least of our problems if even half of what we've just heard comes to fruition,
Yeah. And one more thing I forgot. Sorry. All my written work you can read at thelastamericanvagabond.com. That's also a YouTube channel, The Last American Vagabond. And I go on there sometimes, talk about my work, and it gets showcased there as well.
Well, Whitney Webb, you are really, really important. You are what I would call an essential worker. So I hope everybody goes and supports you, reads your stuff. I mean, and we'll always have you on. You're phenomenal. Thank you very much for spending time with us, and good luck and be safe out there.
Yeah, thanks.
All
Likewise. I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
School bells are ringing. It's time to get the perfect phone plan for your kids at half the price you're used to. Telomobile comes to rescue your family budget with the most flexible phone plans in the U.S. Need just talk and text for the little ones? No problem. Have a data-hungry teenager? Go for unlimited at just $25 a month. Easily upgrade individual lines and build a family plan that fits everyone's needs. Visit Tello.com and discover more.
So I actually wanted to start this video with the study that we're going to be discussing very briefly. A speculation about advanced civilizations possibly causing what's known as directed panspermia and basically being responsible for spreading life to various planets, including planet Earth, billions of years ago. With the goal of this short paper essentially being trying to figure out which potential star systems out there they might be from or have resided on in the past, and which planets should we focus on in order to see if we can find alien life. And though the study itself is very, very simple and extremely short, and basically super hypothetical, it does identify 7 specific planets that do kind of meet certain criteria. All relatively old, several billion years older than the solar system, basically suggesting that something could have existed there even before life on Earth, all containing terrestrial planets in the habitable zone, and all relatively close to us, astronomically speaking. But only one planet kind of stood out, Kepler 452b. A planet that orbits a G-type star very similar to our Sun, and that sometimes has been described as Earth 2.0, but actually still potentially quite different from planet Earth, even though it does have a chance to be maybe habitable. Not necessarily inhabited by anything, but just having conditions maybe similar to planet Earth. But despite the simplicity of this study, and despite the fact that we obviously knew about all of these planets before, and they've already been investigated by a lot of different studies, so far discovering nothing there, I actually still wanted to explore this concept of directed panspermia just to see how likely is it, or if humans can one day start it as well. And so, hello wonderful person, this is Anton. Let's discuss directed panspermia from a scientific perspective, and let's start with basically making a conclusion about this study and whether it makes any sense. Honestly, I don't think it does for one simple reason. In over 4 billion years, ever since the formation of first life on the planet Earth, all of the different stars identified in the study would probably have been in a completely different location, very, very far from planet Earth, to be of any concern. During that time, the solar system must have orbited the galaxy at least 16 times, possibly even more, and so it would have changed neighbors many, many times. And so, if life on Earth was a result of panspermia, it was unlikely to be from any of these stars. They would not have been around. But what about the concept itself? Well, as you can imagine, it's not a new concept at all. Actually, the first idea of directed panspermia is from science fiction in the 30s. It was from this book, Last and First Man by Olaf Stapledon. Here was basically the last humans on Earth sending microscopic life toward various potentially habitable areas in the universe as soon as they discover the solar system is going to end soon, which basically kind of became a staple for science fiction, with this book basically being the first. But I guess before we discuss directed panspermia or panspermia done by someone, is this concept even feasible in real life? Can anything survive in outer space for, let's just say, hundreds or thousands of years in order to spread life from one object to another? Well, right now, based on various experiments, one of which you can actually learn about in the description below, we know that certain bacteria can survive in outer space for at least maybe 3 years. This was actually discovered by the Japanese scientists a few years back. But at the moment, we don't really have any evidence from any of the asteroids or anything discovered on Earth or in outer space that panspermia is actively going on and any life is being spread from Earth or to Earth by any means. So essentially, even right now, this is still kind of sort of hypothetical. And so maybe naturally, it's somewhat difficult. Maybe most bacteria don't survive for longer than a few years, with outer space basically killing everything within approximately a decade. But what about deliberate transport? If you basically design something to transport life from one place to another, making sure that it does survive the long journey. Well, that's I guess a different story. But first I actually wanted to briefly mention this, I guess somewhat controversial and super hypothetical paper from back in 2013. There was a study by 2 Kazakh scientists, the wow signal of the terrestrial genetic code, that basically claimed that life on Earth was a result of panspermia by some ancient civilization, and they even left a message for us in our genetic code. Genetically engineered to kind of remind us that we're made by someone, with the message being,
longing for lazy summer days in Santorini or a dreamy drive down the Blue Ridge Parkway in the fall? What about a spring stroll through stunning cherry blossoms in Kyoto or a winter ski trip to the snowy slopes of Jackson Hole? With the protection of an annual plan from Allianz Travel Insurance, you can be ready to go just about anywhere all year round, whenever wanderlust strikes.
Made in China. Okay, no, I'm joking. It was actually just some kind of a pattern. But in reality, all of the biologists, all of the geneticists widely discredited and disproved this paper, explaining that none of this is actually a pattern, none of this so far makes sense, and there was no secret signal in any of the genetic code. And so definitely not the proof of panspermia or that the life on Earth was from somewhere else. Still though, back in 2013, this study definitely went viral. But despite this super hypothetical paper, there are actually a lot of studies from very well-known scientists, including of course the famous Carl Sagan, that have speculated about the possibility of either life coming from somewhere else or life from Earth going somewhere else and settling there. As a matter of fact, quite a lot of papers in the 70s even focused on major propositions that maybe humanity should seed other planets with various microorganisms in order to basically expand organic life and ensure the survival of life on Earth, but in other conditions. So if something happens to planet Earth and life here is no longer possible, it can still survive in some other star systems. Naturally, this was a contentious view, mostly because scientists also suggested that, okay, but what if life already exists there? All of this could produce unnecessary interference or possibly even complete destruction of native species by possibly more hostile and more destructive life from our own planet. And so obviously there are different opinions and different ways of looking at this. But in this video, I'm not going to touch on ethics, I just wanted to explore the science and if it's even possible. But generally the conclusion here was that in order to avoid any ethical issues, maybe we should focus on extremely young systems or even protoplanetary disks that are still just developing their planets and very likely have no life yet. For example, there's a system at least 25 light years away from us, known as Alpha PSA, also known as Fomalhaut, that's much younger than the solar system, only about 400 million years old, still contains a relatively large dust ring, and definitely contains planets, at least one confirmed. As you can see here, it even still has that accretion disk, or the protoplanetary disk, that we often expect from young star systems. Or the even younger Beta Pictoris system that's only 23 million years old, where the planets just stopped forming. And here we even have signs of comets and asteroids still bombarding these planets and seeding them with a lot of material that most likely resulted in the formation of life on planet Earth. And so these two systems could be potential targets. There's probably still nothing here, but the planets here could one day provide necessary conditions for maybe life to exist. Or maybe we can look for something even younger. One example is the closest star nursery, Rho Ophiuchi. This contains lots of new stars, and stars that are still obviously just forming and don't even have any planets yet, and at least 400 have been already mapped and are pretty well known. And so basically the idea here would be to send something toward these objects in order to have something from planet Earth to one day settle there and start new life kind of from scratch. With all of these bacteria, if successful, eventually evolving into something different, but obviously following very similar principles to what we have on planet Earth. But I guess now the question is, okay, but how exactly would we do this? What are we going to be sending? Obviously we can't just send some kind of a spaceship there, and even if we could, it's extremely unlikely to even survive the journey. Well, here, out of many different propositions, the ones that seem to make the most sense involve these tiny microcapsules, basically containing dormant microbes inside. And each of them would be relatively small, possibly even microscopic in size, just containing a few microbes protected from outer space. But quite a lot of them could be then placed in one larger capsule in order to be then accelerated to various locations where all of these microcapsules would then be spread once they arrive to certain star systems. And so essentially it's a kind of a shotgun approach. You send a larger capsule that spreads smaller capsules in order to seed as much of an area in a typical star system as possible. And so at least a few of these, out of like thousands and even millions, could be captured by various planets. But previous studies were even able to calculate the approximate chance of success depending on the number of microbes sent. And turns out that for a typical star system, we would have to send a biomass of at least 300 kilograms in order to seed a single star, or at least 200 for each of the objects in the Rho Ophiuchi. And that of course is not a very small capsule. It would still have to be accelerated and sent to outer space at relatively large velocities using modern technology and of course using modern propulsion. But in order for these capsules to basically survive and for these microbes not to deteriorate, they would have to move relatively fast. And the best way to accelerate something to fast velocities with such a payload would be a solar sail, with several studies establishing that the solar sail has to be pretty large, possibly at least 500 meters across. And so this would maybe allow a certain capsule to reach fast enough velocities, with the journey only lasting thousands of years instead of millions. And so, for example, in order to reach that system I showed you previously, the FOMO system, the journey here might last up to 50,000 years. But using the same propulsion, in order to reach the nearest molecular cloud, we would probably need at least 800,000 years, possibly even longer. And that's using the best current technologies and the most efficient propulsion. So basically solar sails, which would first accelerate and then decelerate upon arrival. And 800,000 years is maybe pushing it just a little bit. Mostly because currently we don't have any evidence that anything even on Earth can survive that long. And so let's briefly talk about DNA. We know that due to degradation processes, for example cross-linking, deamination, fragmentation, even with the best preservation conditions, most DNA completely degrades anywhere from 400,000 to 1.5 million years after the bacteria becomes sedentary or enters some kind of a stasis. And so basically without being active and continuously reproducing, any DNA sample is just going to completely degrade. And one of the oldest DNA samples that was kind of sequenced to some extent is approximately 1.6 million years old. Although there might be a sample from Greenland from 2022 that might be just a little bit older, at 2 million years old. Although that one is still quite damaged and so kind of difficult to sequence. But in general, DNA by itself degrades really fast. Within about 6.8 million years, only one single base pair remains, even in a relatively large sample of DNA. And that means that, well, if these bacteria are just going to stay in stasis and basically become frozen for like 800,000 years, there's an extremely high chance that none of them will survive. And none of them might even make it to this location. But there might be some good news, and they're actually based on studies where life was revived after thousands of years and was still able to do all of its regular stuff. So for example, there are different studies that were able to revive bacteria and viruses from various samples in permafrost, with many samples in thousands of years old. But the most exciting study out of all of this is the one involving nematodes. Nematodes, as you might know, are extremely simple worms. But they're also basically animals, and a very successful type of an animal as well. And so a while back, one of these was revived from a sample that was about 46,000 years old. And so surviving for 46,000 years in cryostasis, even for animals, seems to be possible, making these worms also a potential target for any kind of a panspermia journey. Moreover, a couple of years ago, one of the Japanese teams was investigating seafloor, with the researchers drilling into the seafloor down to about 1 kilometer. And they actually found ancient mud. But to their surprise, in that mud, they were able to find bacteria that could then be revived, with these samples being at least 100 million years old. And that by itself was really intriguing, because it implies either that bacteria can somehow survive extremely long, or they can find ways to basically reproduce very, very slowly for millions of years, sort of maintaining their DNA through various means unknown to us. And so the discovery of these deep-sea bacteria that somehow was able to survive inside sediment for millions and millions of years possibly provides us with solutions to how this directed panspermia could be done if it's ever done. And so basically by recreating similar conditions inside of these capsules, it might become possible for all of this life to kind of survive inside these capsules until they finally reach the destination, even if it takes millions of years. And to obviously increase success even more, different types of organisms could be included in these capsules, because some of them might be more suitable for certain conditions. For example, sending these organisms, rotifers, which are single cells but are technically eukaryotes, could dramatically increase the chances for complex life to arise, because their DNA is a lot more complex and more resilient compared to bacteria. And obviously we could send things like tardigrades, animals that we know can't survive in space, with experiments from the International Space Station already showing us their resilience. And so the theory behind all of this is, I guess, kind of there. We just don't really have an exact plan and potentially a more definitive proposition on how all of this could be done. But after all of this, I guess the question is, should we? Is this something that most people would agree with, or is this something that we should maybe not do at all? And so there's obviously that ethical implication. And honestly, I personally have no opinions on this, so let me know what you think. Is it actually beneficial for life from our planet to try to spread somewhere else and possibly settle on other worlds? Especially if humanity finds a way to do this very effectively with almost 100% guaranteed chance of success? Or should we just let it be and let the life finally perish in approximately 300 to maybe 500 million years from now, when Earth becomes just a little bit too toasty and the runaway greenhouse effect basically kills everything? So, what do you think? I personally kind of like this idea a little bit better, mostly because that's how a lot of science fiction starts as well. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, on that note, we'll definitely come back and talk more about this once I discover more studies and more exciting ideas in regards to panspermia. But until then, check out previous videos in the description. Thank you for watching, subscribe, share this with someone who loves learning about space and sciences, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon by joining channel membership, or by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt you can find in the description. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.
Do you shower in doo-doo?
Nice piece of hoochie ass. Check the booty on that.
Hey, baby. Hey, man, I don't think you know me, homie. I kick your ass, man. This wasn't up your ass, was it? You're blocking the road. Say, baby. That's right. That's right. Hey, baby, fuck right over here. Cool, baby. Cool. Finish that, man. Damn.
Pass the blend, dude.
Hey, what up? Thanks, dog. That's cool. What up, family? Straight, dog. Hey, thanks, homie. We straight.
Grainger knows that if you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, you go to great lengths, and sometimes heights, to ensure the power is always flowing. Which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
So what if a lot of planets that might host life out there don't actually look like planet Earth at all, but instead look like this? What if they're all unusual ice worlds with a very large ocean underneath that has plenty of life to go around? And what if we actually have a way to prove all of this by looking right here in the solar system? And so, hello wonderful person, this is Anton. Today we're going to discuss a relatively recent study that makes a very intriguing proposition that there could be 17 known exoplanets out there, not so far away from us, that could be extremely similar to something we have right here in the solar system, which are of course ice moons. Moons like Enceladus. And they might have extremely similar effects to Enceladus, with extremely large oceans underneath the shelf of ice that protects all of the life living on the inside. And so let's discuss this in a little bit more detail, but let's actually start with a lot of discussion about Enceladus in the last few months. And here I wanted to start with the webpage you can find in the description below. This is known as NASA's EYES, or Eyes on the Solar System. But in this particular case, we can actually take a look at Saturn and its moons by, I guess, clicking right here, and then clicking it on Enceladus. And the reason I wanted to take a look at this in this particular website is because it also simulates the geysers. You can see them being emitted from this area that looks like unusual tiger stripes, and you can actually learn more about this in one of the videos in the description, including how all of this works. But here, by accelerating time, you can even see the emissions almost as if you're right there around Enceladus. Although technically these are not geysers as much as they're cryovolcanoes. And the reason this is so exciting for scientists is because there is now a very strong belief that based on a lot of observations from the last few months, currently there's a really high chance that a lot of these cryovolcanoes are also emitting signs of potential life underneath Enceladus. In other words, Enceladus currently is the most likely candidate to find life outside of planet Earth. Not Mars, not Venus, not any other moon, it seems to be Enceladus. And though there is a mission planned to Enceladus that's going to be landing here in order to investigate potential signs of life, all of this is not happening until possibly 2050s. And so we're not going to know for sure for at least 20 more years. But all of these signs and all of these observations, along with discoveries of similar moons around other planets, and more importantly, along with discoveries of quite a lot of exoplanets that seem to possess extremely similar density and potentially similar properties to these moons, led to a kind of a hypothetical proposition. What if this is actually where we find most life out there in the entire galaxy? And what if this is actually how life usually begins and how it normally stays for a long time? As a matter of fact, here on planet Earth, it is believed that life might have started around these hydrothermal vents deep in the oceans, which we also believe exist around these moons, and very likely exist quite a lot of other planets as well. These regions are usually filled with a lot of different life and represent very unique ecological niches that can survive in this state for a very long time. And so what if this is the face of most alien life out there? And so based on these assumptions, the recent study decided to discover the most likely planets to potentially be the same to Enceladus, thus representing planets with the highest chance for subterranean or technically subglacial life. And the main premise is simple. Life, as we know it, really needs water, liquid water. But except for planet Earth, we don't know of any other object out there that contains liquid water on its surface. Yet we know that some objects, and actually quite a lot of objects, seem to definitely contain liquid oceans underneath the ice. And so maybe that's where we should be looking, and that's the sort of planets we can kind of expect to host something out there. But why would they even have liquid oceans? Well, in order for these planets to maintain liquid oceans, they basically need heat coming from somewhere, and there are two main sources. The first one is the obvious one.
that sun-drenched breeze, that mid-afternoon champagne glow. You'd think our old stories wouldn't still make us laugh this hard, but they only get better. Now we're all making new ones together. And I truly can't remember the last time I danced as hard as I did last night. Virgin Voyages really knows how to throw a party. Next time, you definitely have to be here.
Internal heat from the radioactive decay of various elements that stayed inside the planet for billions of years. This can produce some of the internal heat and can also maintain some of the initial geological activity. But the other source is the same source as what we have right here around Enceladus, or actually most moons around large planets. Here we're talking about tidal effects or tidal heating. Tidal heating is the less known effect produced by various objects as they essentially pull and stretch each other because of gravitational effects. We mostly experience tides as the rising and falling of ocean levels. On a lot of other objects, including potentially the moon itself, all of this stretching and twisting also produces quite a lot of heat and quite a lot of energy on the inside. In some more extreme cases, it also basically breaks apart the moon with time forming the rings around certain objects, which is how we believe all gas giants acquire their rings. But in most cases, the moons don't fall apart and instead experience quite a lot of geological activity, such as, for example, the famous Io. All of the volcanism here is entirely caused by tidal heating from Jupiter and from its neighboring moons. And so something very similar very often happens around planets orbiting certain stars, especially when they're much closer to those stars, and especially in systems that do have several planets. And so, for example, in the very famous TRAPPIST-1 system, where there are 7 terrestrial planets orbiting relatively close to their parent star, we actually expect relatively high tidal effects for pretty much all of these planets, especially the ones much closer to the star, with some of these effects very likely producing something very similar to Io. Huge amount of geological activity, potentially a lot of outgassing, and very likely lots and lots of heat for maybe life to survive. But for this particular study, the scientists decided to focus on planets that were maybe just a little bit colder than planet Earth, and also maybe a little bit less dense. The reason they wanted to find those planets are essentially twofold. First, low density implies that there might be quite a lot of water. Any kind of an ocean world, or any kind of a world with a lot of water on the surface, would most likely be slightly less dense than planet Earth, but potentially very similar in size and mass. And the reason they wanted those planets to be a little bit colder is obviously because they were looking for planets that would have ice surface. In other words, they wanted to find planets that would be kind of like Enceladus, just bigger and more massive, but also kind of like Io, in a sense that they would have a lot of volcanism or cryovolcanism, because that's physically something we can see with modern telescopes. And in this case, they've discovered 17 such planets that could be these unusual planets, maybe hosting life. So basically, all 17 currently have an extremely high chance to have a subsurface ocean and a lot of geological activity underneath, representing the best targets for potential biosignatures for modern telescopes. And you can see all 17 of them right here in this list. A lot of them we've discussed before, and some of them we've never really talked about, but for the most part, they're all relatively similar. They would all be somewhat similar to planet Earth, a little bit colder, experiencing high tidal effects. Intriguingly, at least 3 of these planets are in the TRAPPIST-1 system, and intriguingly, the closest exoplanet to us, Proxima Centauri b, is one of them as well. And so, for example, here's how they all kind of compare in terms of internal heating produced by a lot of tidal effects. Of all of them, Proxima Centauri b seems to have the highest tidal heating, whereas the TRAPPIST planets seem to have the lowest, but still kind of similar to planet Earth, which our planet experiences from the moon and from the sun. Io experiences just a little bit more, and as you can see, 9 of these planets seem to have more tidal heating than Io. And though obviously this means that maybe some of these planets look kind of like this, a much more likely scenario does involve these ice worlds with a huge amount of cryovolcanism that should be coming out from every direction, and then deposited somewhere around the planet or around the star system. And since modern telescopes can easily detect this around moons like Enceladus, and we know exactly what to look for, a very similar technique could now be used on those exoplanets by trying to find similar signals somewhere where those planets are. In other words, modern telescopes could physically detect some of this subsurface and geological activity by looking at very specific spectra coming from these cryovolcanoes. And this is something we can physically do now with planets like TRAPPIST-1F. Here's actually that other version of Eyes on Exoplanets that shows you what this planet might look like if it obviously has some kind of a subsurface ocean or maybe even surface ocean with a lot of ice. And because this planet passes in front of its star, it becomes possible to see its emissions, and if we happen to discover something that appears very similar to what we see around Enceladus or Europa, that's going to be a telltale sign that cryovolcanism seems to happen here, and these seem to be indeed larger versions of the moons in the solar system. Moreover, if we find life here, there's a really high chance it might exist here as well. And because unlike Enceladus, the mass of this planet is very similar to planet Earth, with just slightly lower density, this is definitely one of the most exciting objects. Here, a single orbit takes approximately 9.2 days, and so we can actually look at this planet many times to see if any cryovolcanism occurs during this time. But in the list of those 17 planets, 2 are really exciting, or I guess 2 are the best candidates so far. And they're not in the TRAPPIST-1 system. One of them is our neighbor Proxima Centauri b, the closest exoplanet around the closest star to us, roughly around 4 light-years away. Here this planet is also just a little bit colder than Earth and is around the same mass with slightly less density. And according to previous research, it might look something like this. Although honestly nobody really knows right now what sort of a composition it has, we just know that it has slightly less density. And because of this, one of the assumptions is that maybe it is covered with a lot of water and specifically has a very thick sheet of ice, with possibly 10 to even 20% of the entire planet basically being water. And because it seems to receive the most tidal heating of all the planets, this presents us with an extremely intriguing target. A planet that could be similar to Enceladus, but with more volcanism than Io. Something that would be super intriguing to investigate, except that there is maybe one problem. This is not a transit planet. It does not pass in front of its own star, and so unfortunately, we're not really going to be able to find any ices or any volatiles coming from this planet by looking at its shadow. Instead, something else has to be used in order to confirm what's going on here. Still, once again, this is one of the primary targets and a super intriguing object that, as you might remember, is also the object where scientists might have discovered the first ever extraterrestrial signal, BLC-1. Although the conclusion today is that maybe that signal actually came from Earth. You can learn more about this in one of the videos in the description. Either way though, definitely target number 1. But what about target number 2? It's this other planet known as LHS 1140b, roughly around 40 light-years away from us, and, just like other planets, is also in the habitable zone, but slightly colder than Earth. Although unlike previous planets, this one is more massive than Earth at approximately 5.6 times the mass. And so technically this is maybe some kind of a super Earth, but also potentially a super Earth that's an ocean world with even more water and even more ice. But also, as you can see from this graph, hundreds of times more geological activity or tidal heating than the moon Io. And though we obviously have no idea what this planet really looks like, this is still an extremely exciting object and has a really high chance right now to also host a lot of life. And because the outgassing here would be extremely similar to what we see around Europa and Enceladus, confirming this is just a matter of time. Basically, by observing this with, for example, James Webb Space Telescope, it will definitely be possible to see these emissions, mostly because a lot of these molecules are extremely easy for infrared telescopes to detect. And so hopefully, in the next few months, someone actually does analyze at least one of these 17 planets, just to provide us with some details and potentially some discoveries. Because at least for now, all of this is just purely theoretical. Nevertheless, at least for now, this is actually the closest we've come to physically finding objects out there with an extremely high chance for some kind of a life based on one assumption. Based on the assumption that objects like Enceladus and Europa also host life inside. And that's of course the first step. The missions that are planned to both Europa and then Enceladus later on are going to serve as a very important stepping stone in order to see if life can exist outside of planet Earth and if it's just as common as some scientists believe. And so if we do find life around one of these objects or even both of these objects, it's extremely likely that all of these 17 planets contain it as well. But the more important question is if we find nothing. If neither Enceladus nor Europa contain any signs of life, that's where we're going to find ourselves questioning everything we know about astrobiology. Maybe rare Earth hypothesis is correct, and maybe life is just as unique as some other scientists believe. And you can learn more about this hypothesis in one of the videos in the description. Anyway, on that note, until future discoveries, or until, I guess, any discoveries in regards to extraterrestrial life, that's all I wanted to mention. Thank you for watching, subscribe, share this with someone who loves learning about space and sciences, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon by joining channel membership or by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt you can find in the description. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.
man. What up, family? Hey. Hey, give me that. Swallow of that. Yo, my dog. Hey, let me hit that, baby. What's up, Holmes? What's up? Yo! Yo, give me some love, homie. Give me that blunt, man. Hey, what up?
Well, I was down on my last dollar, then I started saving, cause the bank said fiscal restraint is what you're craving. So I put my earnings in a high yield account, let the savings compound and the interest mount. I'm optimizing cash flow, putting debt in check now. Time is my friend and not a pain in the neck. And we've got a little cash to rebuild the old debt.
Boring money moves make kind of lame songs, but they sound pretty sweet to your wallet. PNC Bank. Brilliantly boring since 1865.
Relatively recently, there was a really intriguing study that focused on the concept of runaway greenhouse effect. The idea behind a phenomenon where a planet reaches a certain temperature, where all of the greenhouse gases start to accumulate practically exponentially, indefinitely warming up the planet until it becomes completely uninhabitable and extremely hot. And this is of course a really important concept for us to study because of our neighbor, Venus. Venus is a good example of what happens to a planet when this effect occurs and the planet loses all of its water, becomes entirely covered in various greenhouse gases, and remains extremely hot with extremely high pressures of atmosphere for basically billions of years, potentially indefinitely. And so extremely recently, French scientists conducted one of the most accurate simulations in order to discover, Earth, can this happen to our planet? And if so, how? And they did make some really intriguing discoveries. And so today we're going to discuss some of the results and what this means for our planet, but also, I guess, talk about some misconceptions as well. And very quickly, let's start with that. I think the word greenhouse gas, because of political implications, today is basically misused for a lot of different misconceptions. And that's because usually it's associated mostly with carbon dioxide released by various industries. But in reality, pretty much most gases can be greenhouse gases to some extent. Methane is obviously a very powerful one. We've discussed that in one of the previous videos in the description. So are nitrogen oxides, and so is water vapor. And water vapor is a really important one because it actually increases the overall strength of other greenhouse gases and does have a much wider absorption spectrum compared to everything else. Here's actually another way of trying to visualize this, and it basically shows us the amount of absorption based on the wavelength of light. And as you can see, water in this case has a very wide absorption spectrum. This will become important later on. But today we're not really talking about the climate change, we're not really talking about the human contribution to any of this, we're not discussing anything political. We're talking about a much more, I guess, dangerous scenario that we know is going to happen eventually, but the scenario that the scientists want to understand more, because the question here is, hypothetically, can Earth actually reach the same conditions as Venus at some point? And if so, what exactly would need to happen to the planet in order to achieve this runaway greenhouse effect? And so, hello wonderful person, this is Anton. Let's discuss this somewhat hypothetical and somewhat intriguing scenario that answers this question to some extent, with the study actually discovering that apparently it would not take much for Earth to turn into Venus. And it might have almost happened a long time ago. But I guess first, let's start with the obvious. It's extremely unlikely that even if we release all of the carbon dioxide stored in fossil fuels, we'll ever be able to reach these conditions, and so no matter how hard humans try, we're not going to be able to turn Earth into Venus, at least based on calculations from fossil fuels and from carbon dioxide. And even with the extremely high levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which has happened in the past approximately 400 million years ago, we're just not really going to get there yet. Here's actually a graph showing us that carbon dioxide levels were very likely at least 10 times higher than they are today for a pretty long time. And during that time the temperature was very likely close to about 40 degrees Celsius on average. Today it's only about 13 to 14 degrees. And actually we know that Earth survived this and did not become Venus. But all of these older models mostly focus on carbon dioxide for obvious reasons. Basically just to establish if fossil fuels could one day lead us to this. And so some of these older models usually ignored other gases, while also generally using a much simpler one-dimensional models. Okay, science time. In scientific terms, the runaway greenhouse effect is also sometimes referred to as Kobayashi-Ingersoll limit, essentially representing a limit when the planet can no longer lose enough heat and instead keeps accumulating heat on the inside its atmosphere, becoming hotter and hotter over time. And we know that for Earth, theoretically, this limit is going to be reached when the sun starts to emit approximately 10% more luminosity, or basically becomes about 10% brighter. This will most likely happen approximately 1 billion years from today, with the average temperature on the planet finally reaching approximately 47 degrees Celsius, 117 Fahrenheit. And it's actually once we reach these temperatures where things start to transform extremely rapidly. And at this point, it's not carbon dioxide or even methane that becomes a problem, it's actually water, which is exactly what this new study focused on. Here they were able to simulate the runaway greenhouse effect by focusing on what happens when water starts to evaporate from the surface of the oceans, and specifically focusing on the main effects that are going to be driving these extreme changes in the environment. And so it turns out that as soon as we reach this temperature of about 47 degrees Celsius on average, which is obviously going to be higher in certain locations, lower in other ones, a slight increase in evaporation from the surface of the oceans will suddenly dramatically increase the greenhouse effects from the water, thus increasing evaporation even more, leading to more and more water accumulating in the atmosphere as various types of clouds. And this is actually the first time ever that the scientists focused on this transition stage itself, trying to see what exactly happens to the planet as it goes from being habitable and having a liquid ocean to basically becoming Venus, with one of the main discoveries suggesting a formation of very unusual clouds that will very likely form around the entire planet and potentially permeate the entire stratosphere, creating a kind of a layering effect, practically allowing no heat to escape. And these super dense clouds that will suddenly even appear much higher in the atmosphere will basically begin an irreversible greenhouse runaway effect. By dramatically altering the atmosphere and continuously increasing evaporation from the oceans, this basically begins a process that is impossible to stop. It causes the planet to suddenly acquire a much higher atmospheric pressure, a much higher content of water vapor, and, most importantly, an extremely high greenhouse effect. All of this driven by a large amount of surface ocean that existed here for billions of years. And after evaporation of only 10 meters of surface water, the atmospheric pressure would actually double, very likely leading to temperatures of over 500 degrees Celsius within a very short period of time, potentially just a few hundred years. And at this point, this is completely unstoppable. The ocean will continuously evaporate, add even more pressure, create even more extreme conditions, and basically create the planet completely void of water with an extremely thick, gooey conditions on the surface formed by highly pressurized water vapor, with the final temperatures and final pressures very likely being approximately 1500 degrees Celsius and approximately 273 atmospheric pressures. All of this occurring in possibly just under 1000 years. And so once the planet reaches these extreme conditions, that's basically it. It's now technically primordial Venus. But because all of this forms a very thick layer of water vapor, now all of this starts to interact with the sun, beginning the new process of photodissociation. The H2O molecules will fall apart and create hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen escapes into the rest of the solar system, oxygen very likely forms something on its surface, or potentially creates more CO2. And this begins the next stage, the so-called second stage known as dry transition phase. Here the water will slowly disappear, but over time become replaced with CO2 and possibly a few other gases. At which point, Earth becomes a slightly more extreme version of Venus because it does have slightly more carbon to create carbon dioxide. And this study once again confirms that this is exactly what probably happened to Venus a few billion years ago. Because it's much closer to the Sun, it started to lose its ocean, it reached the Kobayashi-Ingersoll limit much quicker, and its water started to evaporate much quicker as well. And there's a lot of evidence for previous existence of water here because of an extremely high deuterium to hydrogen ratio in Venusian atmosphere. It's about 150 times the amount we see from planet Earth, and it suggests that heavier isotopes, deuterium, that very likely came from the oceans that used to exist here, are still lingering in the Venusian atmosphere. But one thing that makes Venus different from planet Earth is that unlike Venus, Earth does have plate tectonics, at least for now. And so that's why Venus has so much carbon dioxide on its surface, because it mostly never got to go inside the planet, with volcanoes constantly releasing more carbon dioxide into Venusian atmosphere. But a lot of carbon is trapped inside planet Earth, and so for at least some time, the carbon dioxide levels on planet Earth are going to be pretty low. As a matter of fact, once all of the water vapor disappears, there might even be a period when the planet might become possibly slightly cooler and maybe even somewhat more hospitable again. But because plate tectonics at this point might actually shut down as well, constant volcanism and constant geological activity will eventually release more and more carbon dioxide as well, and so at some point it will go back to being super hot again. But this would take hundreds of millions of years and possibly even billions of years, and so there might be a very intriguing period on the planet after it loses its water vapor when it's actually kind of empty on the surface, but possibly not too hot. But during this water vapor stage, it is going to be super extreme. As a matter of fact, it's going to have extreme everything. Extremely powerful wind speeds, very thick atmosphere that's not going to allow any light through, and super pressurized, super hot, and quite exotic conditions right on the surface. And so yeah, modern climatology studies definitely imply that our planet is not going to stay the way it is forever. It might have maximum 1 billion years from today, and after this, things will actually escalate pretty quickly. But this study also provides us with some really important implications in regards to exoplanets, as well as reminds us of how precious and how unique our planet is after all. Too little greenhouse, and it becomes an ice ball. Too much greenhouse, and it becomes a heated sauna. And so for billions of years, our planet managed to maintain the balance between the two, allowing life to evolve. Why and how, that's of course a question nobody can answer, but that's why the scientists are trying to figure out if something like this can also happen somewhere else out there.